Chapter 687. Two old men in black followed behind the young man in white. They rode their green horses and rushed over. They reined in their horses and stood still between the two camps. Three people, one in white and two in black. They just stood there and looked around. They looked at the camps on both sides as if there was no one else around. It was as if these people did not exist. Seeing the word Yi, Chu Yang and Tan Tan were shocked. Could it be the Yi clan of the upper three heavens? The two of them were equally sensitive to the word Yi, because their master's lover was surnamed Yi, Yi Chu Chen. The three of them stood there in an imposing manner for a while. Then, something happened that left everyone tongue-tied and speechless. They didn't know what to feel. The young man in white suddenly stood up from his horse. His white clothes fluttered in the wind as if he was flying. He just stood there on the horse. His figure was tall and straight. He looked around proudly. Regardless of which side the crowd was on, they all cheered in their hearts. What a handsome young man. But this white-clothed young man who had attracted everyone's admiration just now suddenly smiled faintly and charmingly. He actually stretched out one of his hands on the horse. Then he bent his fingers and twisted his waist like a water snake. Then he curled his fingers and twisted his waist like a water snake. Then he raised his orchid fingers and said in a coquettish voice, "It's so lively. I'm really not late. This is so exciting. Ah, I'm Yi Shiyu from the Yi clan of the upper three heavens. Greetings to all the handsome and beautiful men here." After he finished, he actually smiled shyly. His eyes moved. As a man, he was actually so charming. Everyone was stunned. Their eyeballs were bouncing around. It's so satisfying. He actually called me a slave. What the hell? This is actually a transvestite. Especially when they heard the last sentence, "Greetings to all the handsome and beautiful men." Instantly, all the men present felt like vomiting in their hearts. Their faces darkened. Although she was very beautiful, there was no need for you to come and greet her. Furthermore, she said, "Sigh." Naturally, no man would admit that he was ugly. This point was actually the same as that of a woman. Then, everyone realized another big thing. The Yi clan. The Yi clan of the upper three heavens. Yi Shiyu. The battle had not started yet, but the strongest side of the spectators from the upper three heavens had arrived. The Yi clan. The number one clan of the upper and lower heavens. Mo Tianji's eyes flashed. He smiled warmly and said, "However, I wonder why Dookie has come here this time? If you need my help, I'm Mo Tianji." Hearing this, Yi Shiyu immediately threw a flirtatious glance at Mo Tianji. He was overjoyed and said, "Oh my, you're Mo Tianji? You're so handsome." Mo Tianji got goosebumps all over his body. He shuddered and his lips turned blue. Was too. It's a pity that I dons Yi. Yi. Translation Yi. Yi and said translation Yi translation Yi translation Translation. But now, everyone just wanted to lower their heads and vomit. They did not even have the courage to look at him. "I'm only here to watch the battle." Yi Shiyu winked at Mo Tianji flirtatiously. Then he actually covered his mouth and smiled, shyly. He said tenderly, "I love to see people bleed." Mo Tianji suddenly felt like dying was better than being alive. It was very stressful to bear such a powerful flirtatious glance alone. Fortunately, Yi Shiyu only said a few words before he dismounted from his horse. He swayed his hips and walked to the middle of the room. Then he walked into the distance. The two black-clothed elders behind him waved their sleeves and the snow and ice on the ground started to gather like a storm. In an instant, it became a stage that was hundreds of feet high. Then the three of them floated up and went up to the stage. Yi Shiyu glanced at Mo Tianji affectionately. He pursed his lips and smiled, sweetly. Then he sat down and said sweetly, "You guys are done fighting. I'll just watch from the sidelines." He blinked his eyes and said, "You're welcome." Then he giggled and shook his body. Mo Tianji was sweating profusely. He wiped his forehead and retreated awkwardly. Chu Yang found it funny. It was his first time seeing Motng in such a sorry state, but he did not laugh, because he finally thought of the origin of the name Yi Shiryu. He was delicate and soft, born with a beard and eyebrows. He had a strong masculine aura, but a woman's heart. He was tactful and exquisite, lowering his eyebrows without hesitation. Even though he was soft-hearted, he could still decide the wind and clouds. He was one of the 3 Grand Dukes of the Yi clan, Yi Shiryu. He was ranked 3rd among the 3 Grand Dukes of the Yi clan. He looked like a transvestite, but he was terrifying in terms of scheming and tactics. If a normal clan had such a freak, why would they let him out to embarrass themselves? But the Yi clan not only let him run around outside, they also gave him important tasks. Yi Shiryu was very powerful. There was once another Gong Mengsei from the upper 3 heavens who commented on Yi Shiryu. He said, "This guy is a classic example of someone who calls you brother sweetly but stabs you viciously in the back." He was an extremely dangerous person. Chu Yang did not stay in the upper 3 heavens for many days in his previous life. Therefore, he did not know many people. But this Yi Shiryu was one of the most famous people in the upper 3 heavens. He was known as a demon. It was very difficult to not have heard of him. Things in the world were evil. Just say the word tortoise. Just as Chu Yang was muttering to himself, another long cry came from the mountainside. It reverberated and rushed into the clouds. Autumn comes and the world is a piece of land. When will I fall? Beauties are like flowers. You should cherish them. I am Mengsei. Mengsei, the flower protector. He was one of the masters of the upper 3 heavens. He was famous for cherishing beauties. However, he was ruthless and merciless to men. His catchphrase was, "There are very few beauties in the world. We should cherish them. Admiring flowers is better than plucking them. I would rather have a branch full of flowers than pluck a single one." This man's love and care for beautiful women was known to the extreme. But he only admired them. He never wanted to possess them. Such behavior could be considered as a weirdo. With a long and drawn-out cry, a strange little green donkey quickly rushed into the field. This donkey, only its ears looked like a donkey. In fact, it was not much bigger than a dog. A young man in green rode on the donkey's back. He held a green flute in his hand. His slanted long eyebrows were deep into his hair. His beautiful red phoenix eyes were slightly lowered. He looked indescribably peaceful. Behind him, 2 old men in green walked. Their sleeves fluttered. Their feet did not touch the ground. They did not have mounts and were only walking. However, they were as smooth as flowing water. "Greetings, everyone." Mengsei hugged his flute and bowed gently. He said, "Mengsei has been entrusted by my clan to watch the battle. I have no enmity with any of you. It's good that we are at peace. Please allow Mengsei to be a spectator. Thank you all for your magnanimity." He said it as if he was very humble and respectful. It also seemed like he was asking for everyone's opinion. However, he did not care about their reactions. Whether he agreed or not, he casually said and entered the arena. He walked to the side of Yi Shiu's high platform and did the same thing. Another white snow platform rose from the ground and Mengsei turned around gracefully. He flew up into the air and waved his flute in the air, letting out a sharp and clear cry. "Brother Mengsei, you're here? I've missed you these few days." Yi Shiu tilted his head and looked at Mengsei, who was on the high platform beside him, innocently and cutely. Mengsei's expression changed. "We're in public. What evil tricks are you trying to pull?" He turned his head, closed his eyes and sat down cross-legged. He did not move at all. Yi Shiu snorted and tilted his head. "How shameless!" She flipped her hair in a fit of pique and turned her face away, fuming with anger. The 4 elders sat cross-legged on both sides of the 2 of them. They closed their eyes and did not say a word. However, everyone below knew that each of these 4 old men was no small matter. Any one of them could be considered a tyrant in the upper 3 heavens. People from the Yi clan and the He clan have arrived. Motng's expression was solemn. It seems that all the big clans in the upper 3 heavens are here this time. These 2 people are very dangerous, Chu Yang said softly. However, they're only here to watch the battle. You can ignore them. Watch the battle. Mo Tianji frowned and looked at Chu Yang. Then, he looked at Gu Duxing. Chu Yang understood that Mo Tianji's meaning was clear. Don't let them know that you're the master of the tribulation sword. I know. Chu Yang gave him a reassuring look. Mo Tianji sighed softly. He had a lot on his mind. The big clans of the upper three heavens had sent people to watch the battle of the upper three heavens. This was thought-provoking. If it was not for the master of the tribulation sword, then it was for the awakened ones of the 3 stars divine clan. However, these 2 people were in their own camp. Even if one of them was discovered, the consequences would be unimaginable. Furthermore, the dreams of his brothers would be completely gone at this moment. How could Mo Tianji not be worried? Then, after waiting for a while, the sound of horse hooves could be heard. It was getting closer and closer. Tian Bu Hui took the lead and rushed in. Then, a burly figure rode on a horse. He was like a moving mountain. He had a violent and majestic aura. Everyone recognized this person. He was the first duke of the Li clan of the upper 3 heavens, Li Xiongtu. The main force of the opponent's battle finally appeared at this moment. It was like 2 magnets meeting each other. The moment Li Xiongtu appeared, Dong Wushang's eyes suddenly lit up. He looked over. Then, before Li Xiongtu could rein in his horse, his eyes met Dong Wushang's. These 2 people were very similar in terms of temperament, physique, martial arts, and fighting styles. The twin maniacs of the 12 famous people in Chu Yang's previous life were destined to be enemies at this moment. Chapter 688. Dong Wushang's gaze was domineering and sharp, while Li Xiongtu's gaze was calm and wild. Their gazes met and they couldn't be separated. When their gazes met, it was as if 4 bolts of lightning had collided in midair, creating intense sparks that lit up the sky. Chu Yang could clearly feel a monstrous fighting spirit violently emanating from Dong Wushang's body. It surged out violently. It was like a raging tide. Li Xiongtu's clothes fluttered in the wind, but he remained motionless on his horse. However, snowflakes suddenly flew up from the flat snow ground between the 2 of them, as if they were swept by an invisible broom and separated into 2 sides. The snowflakes flew like a dream. A thin path appeared between the 2 of them, leading to each other. Only to each other. There was no need for any doubt at all. Everyone was aware of this. In today's battle, Li Xiongtu's opponent was Dong Wushang. Dong Wushang's opponent was definitely Li Xiongtu. No matter who interfered, they would probably be attacked by the 2 of them together. These were 2 people who were absolutely alike. But because of this, neither of them would allow the other to survive after this battle. Dong Wushang. Li Xiongtu roared. Li Xiongtu. Dong Wushang said solemnly. Then, the 2 of them laughed wildly at the same time. They pointed at each other and shouted at the same time, "I'll send you on your way today." Even their tones were exactly the same. Then, the 2 of them stopped talking and retreated. However, the battle intent on their faces became more and more intense. On the high platform, Yi Shiyu's delicate eyebrows twitched. He looked at Dong Wushang and Li Xiongtu thoughtfully and muttered, "I didn't expect there to be such people in these 3 days. How did Li Xiongtu's strength improve so much in such a short time?" Chu Yang stared at Li Xiongtu and said puzzledly, "I saw him last year. At most, he was a 4th-grade martial king. However, he's on par with Dong Wushang. He's at least a 2nd-grade martial emperor. What's going on?" Gu Duxing and Mo Tianji were also puzzled by this question. How did Li Xiongtu improve so quickly? Did he have a fortuitous encounter? Mo Tianji frowned. This was the most likely explanation. Only a sudden consumption of some miraculous elixir or treasure of heaven and earth could have such a terrifying effect. After all, there couldn't be a 2nd Calamity Sword Master in this world. I'm afraid he had a fortuitous encounter. Chu Yang's voice suddenly became louder. He said in shock, "Did he meet the Calamity Sword Master?" Mo Tianji was stunned. He was shocked. Then he muttered, "This is impossible, right?" One had to admit that Chu Yang and Mo Tianji's cooperation was absolutely flawless. Everyone knew that facing a schemer was terrifying, But facing a schemer alone was 10,000 times more terrifying. It was facing two conspirators who were conspirators of the same mind. Many of Chu Yang's brothers had also advanced in this way. His brothers and brothers of Tianji and Mo's Wushang, and his of Wushang's Tian Wu and himself. However, Mo Tianji was so shocked that he immediately added, "This is impossible." And he had almost completely dispelled the suspicion that he had towards them. Although the two of them spoke in a low voice, it was as if they had unknowingly raised their voices due to shock. Many people around them heard it. Everyone felt a prickling sensation in their backs. On the high platform, Yi Xiu no longer looked lazy and sat upright. His sharp eyes shot over at once. He glanced at the two of them and turned to Li Xiong Tuesday. His charming gaze was now serious. On the other side, Meng Sei's body shook. He looked at Li Xiong too with a deep gaze. Both of them had the same thought in their minds at the same time. 1 year. From 4th grade martial king to 2nd grade martial emperor. Such a miracle. If it wasn't a treasure, then it must be the Calamity Sword Master. After all, the potential of a human body was limited. If one relied purely on hard work, then this kind of improvement would kill one. It was impossible. Li Xiong too must have had a fortuitous encounter. Yi Shiyu and Meng Sei were both from the upper 3 heavens. They naturally thought that a treasure that could raise one's cultivation by 8 grades in a year was in the upper 3 heavens. It was hard to find and was a legendary item. What kind of treasure could there be in the upper 3 heavens? If that was the case, Li Xiong too must have met the Calamity Sword Master. Yi Shiyu's eyes flashed. He smiled coquettishly and said softly, "This? Fierce Duke Li, I heard that you were only a 4th stage martial king at this time last year?" Li Xiong too frowned. Obviously, he didn't like this trap. He nodded and said, "That's right. I was only a 3rd grade martial king last year." Yi Shiyu smiled and said, "Is that so? Hee, Duke Li, you've improved so quickly. I'm so envious." At this moment, a voice said, "Yi Shiyu, it doesn't matter whether you're envious or not. You can't interrogate someone from the Li clan." At the entrance, 3 people appeared. The first person was tall and burly. He was like a moving mountain. He was even more muscular than Dong Wushang and Li Xiong Tuesday. He was about 25 years old, but he was burly. Yi Shiyu and Meng Sei's expressions changed. They said, "So it's Brother Li." The burly man snorted and turned to look at Li Xiong Tuesday. He said, "You're Li Xiong too?" Li Xiong too said, "That's right. You are?" "I'm from the Li clan of the upper 3 heavens. I'm Li Batian. You should call me 4th brother." Li Batian laughed and said, "You're not bad. 4th brother." Li Xiong too was delighted. He knew how desperate his clan was to return to the upper 3 heavens. Li Batian allowed him to call him 4th brother in front of everyone. This meant that he acknowledged the Li clan of the upper 3 heavens. "All right." Li Batian laughed and said, "I can't help you in a fair battle. But after this battle, I'll bring all of you back to the upper 3 heavens." "Thank you, 4th brother." Li Xiong too was delighted. Everyone around him, including Tian Bu Hui and the others, looked envious. "Bring you back to the upper 3 heavens." From this moment onwards, the Li clan of the upper 3 heavens belonged to the upper 3 heavens. Li Batian laughed and said, "You don't have to thank me. This is what the elder ancestor wants. If you can break through to the martial emperor level in the upper 3 heavens, I'll bring all of you back. And now you've already surpassed this goal." After he finished speaking, Li Batian strode forward with his 2 guards. He didn't even bat an eyelid at Yi Shiyu and Meng Sei's greetings. Yi Shiyu snorted and Meng Sei's face turned pale. But they didn't say anything in the end. Chu Yang thought to himself, "It seems like Li Batian is a very powerful person among the younger generation of the upper 3 heavens." Mo Tianji thought, "Although this person is very powerful, he doesn't know how to be tactful. Even if he's very strong, I can kill him with a little trick. There's nothing to fear from this person." On the other hand, Yi Shiyu and Meng Sei seem to be very shrewd. They don't seem easy to deal with. Li Batian's burly body stepped on the snow. It seemed as if the ground beneath his feet would tremble with every step he took. When he was about to walk past Dong Wushang, he stopped. He said, "You're Dong Wushang?" Dong Wushang's gaze froze. "So what if I am?" Li Ba Tian snorted coldly. He said, "Li Xiong too is my brother." Dong Wushang burst out laughing. "If you can't bear to see him die, I can let the two of you fight him together." Li Ba Tian had wanted to cast a shadow over Dong Wushang so that Li Xiong too would have an easy chance of winning. However, he didn't expect Dong Wushang to be so fearless and audacious. His pupils shrank and his gaze became dangerous. A mocking voice said, "You just said that it would be a fair fight. Now you're helping your brother to oppress him? What, you can't hold him back anymore? Are you going to attack him out of anger?" A young girl dressed in white stood behind Dong Wushang and spoke disdainfully. Her voice was crisp and cold. Everyone present heard her. Li Ba Tian snorted and looked deeply at Dong Wushang. He walked forward and said slowly, "What do ignorant women and children know? It's an unfair victory." Dong Wushang was furious. He shouted, "Li Ba, remember this. Sooner or later, Second Master Dong will fight you." Li Ba Tian didn't turn around. He said slowly, "As long as you can live today." As he spoke, he walked to the bottom of the two high platforms. Another snow platform rose from the ground. Li Ba Tian shot into the clouds and actually crossed several hundred feet of the high platform. He slowly descended. His lightness technique was truly shocking. However, everyone knew that he was a duke of the upper three heavens, but he was being bullied like this in the upper three heavens. He was using this shocking leap to vent his frustration. Yi Shiyu and Meng Se looked at Li Xiong too discreetly. Their eyes revealed a murderous intent. They didn't believe what Li Ba Tian said about taking him to the upper three heavens when he reached the emperor level. They only thought, is the Li clan using Li Xiong too to get on the good side of the Calamity Sword Master? Then, when the Calamity Sword Master is fully grown, all of us will be in trouble, and the Li clan will benefit. How could there be such a good thing? Damn it, I'll find a chance to kill this suspicious follower of the Master of Calamity Sword first. How could I allow such a threat to exist in this world? Li Ba Tian was also secretly thinking, has this clan brother of mine really gained the favor of the Calamity Sword Master? If that's the case, then the clan's plan has to be changed. After all, getting on the good side of the Calamity Sword Master was the dream of all the great clans. For so many years, no clan had ever succeeded in going against the Calamity Sword Master. There were countless examples, and they were all bloody lessons. How could they not be shocked? However, as long as they couldn't get on the list, they had to struggle even if they knew that they were going to die. They couldn't just wait to be killed, right? However, once there was an opportunity to get on the good side of the Calamity Sword Master, who would let it go? Li Ba Tian looked at Yi Shiyu and Meng Se from the corner of his eyes. He sensed the murderous intent in their eyes and snorted coldly. He thought, with me here, you can dream on if you want to kill him. On the other side, Mo Tianji watched everything coldly. Suddenly he had a thought. He moved closer to Chu Yang's ear and whispered, Li Xiong too doesn't have to die. Chu Yang nodded his head slightly. Chapter 689. The two of them looked at each other tacitly, and they could see the smile in each other's eyes. Both sides had finished setting up their tents, but they had a tacit understanding not to start the battle immediately. Everyone knew that no matter what, they had to wait for all the great clans of the upper three heavens to arrive. Only 3 clans had arrived. If the other clans didn't wait for them, they wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. It was noon. The sun shone on the snow-covered mountain, but it didn't feel warm at all. A beam of white light flashed, and everyone felt their vision blur. 3 purple figures appeared at the entrance of the mountain. One of them was a purple-clothed woman. She had a graceful bearing, and her beauty was unparalleled. Her eyebrows were thin, and her eyes were sharp. Her figure was slender, and she looked like a blooming plum blossom on the snow-covered ground. However, the frost on this woman's face seemed to be heavier and colder than the ice and snow that had existed since ancient times. With a single glance, it was as if it could freeze a person to death. Ling Han Shui from the Ling clan. Other than this sentence that clearly indicated her status, she didn't say anything else. Then she walked straight in. Only when she saw the 2 stone tablets did Ling Han Shue's gaze seem to change. Sister Shue has come personally. Li Ba Tian stood up on the high platform and laughed heartily. Meng Se also stood up straight and said respectfully, "Greetings, Sister Shue." Yi Shiyu also became serious, which was rare for him. He said respectfully, "Sister Shue, you're here?" His voice didn't sound pretentious. Instead, it sounded more like he was trying to get on her good side. This situation was like a group of mice meeting a cat. Ling Han Shui looked at them plainly and didn't say anything. When she looked at Yi Shiyu, she frowned slightly. Then she walked past everyone like ice and snow. When she passed by, Chu Yang and the others felt a chill that seeped into their bones. Then she waved her slender hand, and an ice mountain suddenly rose from the ground. Her purple robes fluttered, and she slowly ascended like a purple cloud. When she reached the high platform, she closed her eyes and sat in midair. She didn't speak or move. The 2 purple-clothed elders standing behind her were also like wooden statues. Ling Han Shui ignored Yi Shiyu and Li Ba Tian, but the 3 of them heaved a sigh of relief at the same time. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. It was as if the 3 of them were saying, "Don't bother with me. Don't pay attention to me. If you care about me, I'll be in trouble." Just like that, Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. This Ling Han Shui must be from the Ling clan of the upper 3 heavens. It seemed that Ling Han Shui was very busy. Otherwise, Yi Shiyu wouldn't be so afraid of Li Ba Tian. Yes. However, the Yi clan was the number 1 clan in the upper 3 heavens. Why was Yi Shiyu so afraid of Ling Han Shui? The sound of hooves rang out again, and another large group of people and horses rushed up the mountain. This time, the one who came up was still a young man, but the group behind him was much larger than the other big clans. There were more than 50 people. After they came up, more than 40 of them left on their horses and joined the Tian family's group. There were only 3 people left. One of them was a 25-year-old young man, while the other 2 were elders. "I'm Shi Qingyu from the Shi clan of the upper 3 heavens. I'm here to observe the battle under the orders of my clan," the young man said gently. As for the others, they were invited to help because of personal grievances. However, their actions have nothing to do with the Shi clan. "Don't worry, everyone." After he said this, even Ling Han Shui opened her eyes slightly. She looked at him with disdain and snorted. The experts of the upper 3 heavens were specially invited to help. How could the people of the upper 3 heavens resist them? To think that you still have the face to say, "Don't worry, everyone." Who could be at ease? Yi Shiyu laughed like a little hen. "Shi Qingyu, why don't you call yourself Qingyu? Call yourself Qingyu smart, alright? Do you really think that everyone is stupid? Your Shi clan only has this kind of moral integrity." When Yi Shiyu saw Ling Han Shui, he was like a mouse seeing a cat. When he saw Shi Qingyu, he was like an old cat seeing a mouse. He obviously didn't think highly of the Shi clan. Shi Qingyu wasn't angry. He said, "Do you think that the Yi clan can care about personal grievances?" After he finished speaking, he didn't care about what others said. He walked to the side and ordered 2 elders to build an ice platform. Just as the ice platform was built, Ling Han Shui snorted and raised her hand. With a boom, the huge ice platform suddenly collapsed and broke into pieces. Then, she said coldly, "Shi Qingyu, if you sit beside me, I'll kill you." Shi Qingyu's face darkened, but there was nothing he could do. He had to smile and say, "Sister Shui, what are you saying?" Little brother wanted Sister Shui to teach him, but since Sister Shui doesn't agree, then little brother will stay away. After he finished speaking, he swallowed his anger and retreated. He built an ice platform high up in another direction. Chu Yang didn't turn back. He said thoughtfully, "It seems that the Shi clan isn't that scary. At least among the big clans, the Shi clan is the weakest. You should be able to see this." He paused for a moment and said, "You have a good memory. Take a look at these people and decide." Mo Tianji nodded. He didn't say anything, but he remembered Chu Yang's words. He knew that he didn't need to speak. He only needed to think. And Chu Yang's words had given him a huge hint. The Shi clan was the weakest. Since they were the weakest, then in the future, if they were to fight, he could use this weakest to make countless moves. Because the weak and the strong were natural contradictions. Mo Tianji was already thinking about how to use this so-called strong and weak. In an instant, he came up with 7 or 8 brilliant ideas on how to deal with the Shi clan in the future. While thinking, Mo Tianji looked for a pen and paper to write down these ideas. This was his habit. No matter what idea he came up with, as long as it wasn't something he could use now, he had to write it down in his own unique words to avoid forgetting. Although with his memory, the possibility of forgetting was close to zero, he had developed this habit. Furthermore, Mo Tianji's notes couldn't be understood by normal people. Stone, 1 divorce, 2 rooms, 3 marriages, 4 tribulations, 5 bullying water. If someone picked up Mo Tianji's notes, they would definitely be tormented until they went crazy. They wouldn't understand what was written in it. Next was the Zhuge clan. Compared to the other clans, the Zhuge clan was very low-key. After greeting the others, they silently chose a spot and stood on it. Next was the Lan clan. It wasn't the young people who came, but a man in his 30s or 40s. He brought 2 expert guards and entered slowly. Next was the Shao clan. It was still a young duke and 2 guards. When the Shao clan arrived, Chu Yang paid special attention. Not for any other reason, but because the Shao clan was Duke Yu's biggest enemy. To see the foundation of a clan, one had to look at the older generation. But to see the future of a clan, one had to look at the younger generation. As for this young master of the Shao clan, his name was Shao Juechen. However, the word Juechen didn't mean anything. Instead, he had a rather gloomy demeanor. Furthermore, with his triangular eyes and bulbous nose, he gave off a rather foolish feeling. But Chu Yang immediately changed his point of view. Although this Shao Juechen didn't look good, and his words gave people a foolish feeling, he was definitely not foolish. Since he was here today, if he was foolish, he wouldn't have come. Then there was only one possibility. This Shao Juechen was a powerful person who pretended to be a pig to eat a tiger. This point of view was fully approved by Mo Tianji. As for Mo Tianji, he naturally added a thick and heavy brush stroke to the name of the Shao clan. Focus on them. After waiting for a while, the clan of this life arrived late. The sun and moon rise from the east, and the stars sink from the west. How many vicissitudes of life, how much hatred, half life, half soul. Along with a clear voice, a young man in a green robe leisurely appeared. He had a folding fan in his hand. He was still waving it around on this cold mountain peak, but it didn't give people the feeling that it was funny. I am Qin Fei Qin from the Qin clan of the upper 3 heavens. You can call me 5th Master Qin. Qin Fei Qin's first words were, I am here to watch the battle, so you don't have to suck up to me and don't have to try to get close to me. To put it bluntly, I really don't care about the battle of the upper 3 heavens. But I am just here to relax. The 2 expert guards behind him followed him closely. They watched as he waved his folding fan and talked nonsense, but they didn't stop him. After hearing these words, everyone's face was filled with anger. But this 5th Master Qin obviously didn't care. He waved his folding fan and walked forward casually. It is understandable that you don't want to accept it. I really like that you don't want to accept it. Of course, if anyone dares to stand out and say that in front of me, this 5th master will really admire him. This person's words could really infuriate the dead to the point of jumping in their coffins. But even the people from the other clans of the upper 3 heavens didn't refute this arrogant person. At most, they just snorted coldly. 5th Master Qin. A cold voice said, Don't show your childishness here. If you want to watch the battle, quickly sit down. If you don't want to watch, get lost. It was Ling Han Shui. Among all the people present, only Ling Han Shui dared to face Qin Fei Qin directly. Qin Fei Qin laughed and said, I was wondering who it was. So it is little sister Shui. Since little sister Shui has said so, I will naturally follow your orders and gladly accept it. Ling Han Shui's pretty face was filled with frost. She snorted coldly and ignored him. Qin Fei Qin actually built an ice platform next to Han Shui and sat on it. Ling Han Shui snorted angrily and turned around. Chu Yang's heart trembled. This fifth Master Chen was definitely a scary person. His inner self was definitely not as shallow as what he had shown. And this guy was definitely pursuing Ling Han Shui. And Ling Han Shui was obviously not willing. Was there anything he could use to his advantage? Chu Yang's thoughts flashed. The big clans were finally all here. At this moment, Tian Bu Hui smiled lightly and said, "Everyone is here. Brother Chu, Brother Mo, Brother Dong, Brother Gu, my sword is also not willing to be left out." Chapter 690. When the big clans heard Tian Bu Hui's words, they all looked as if a good show was about to begin. However, when this sinister voice sounded, their faces all changed. Even Ling Han Shui and Qin Fei Chen's faces turned serious. They even felt a little uneasy. Chu Yang was curious. What kind of person could have such power? To be able to silence all the big clans? Following this voice, everyone looked over in shock. At the entrance of the mountain, there were 3 people. The 3 of them were all dressed in hemp robes with wide sleeves and straw sandals. They were dressed very simply, but they had an aura of seclusion. One of them had a scabbard on his left, another had a sword on his right, and the third had a sword on his back. The person in front had white hair and a white beard, and he looked hale and hearty. The second person had white hair, and his body was a little hunched. He was thin, and his face was pale and full of wrinkles. The third person had black hair, and his face was as white as snow. He was tall and looked like he was only 40 years old. At first glance, it looked like 3 generations of Elder Qing had arrived at the same time. And Chu Yang felt that one of them looked very familiar. After thinking carefully, he realized that he had seen him before. He remembered that in the far north wastelands, there was someone who was chased away by Bu Lu Qing. It was this person. Chu Yang finally knew who these 3 people were, and why the big clans were so afraid of them. They were the law enforcers of the heavens. This was the most mysterious and powerful force in the entire heavens, the law enforcers of the heavens. How can we miss such a grand occasion? The white-haired old man at the front didn't even open his eyes as he slowly said, "We came uninvited. I hope that the people of the ruling family won't take offense." You must be joking." Chen Feichen smiled and said hurriedly, "It's a pleasant surprise that you are here. Please take a seat." The white-haired old man ignored him and said, "The big clans have thousands of paths, and all of them lead to the heavens. We have always admired them." The other members of the hegemon clans couldn't keep their faces straight after hearing this. Their faces turned red and white. "There are tens of thousands of paths, and all of them lead to the heavens," was clearly accusing the big clans of ignoring the rules of the heavens and coming down without permission to stir up trouble. Lord Enforcer, don't you think that the scenery here is great?" Yi Xiu smiled and threw a flirtatious wink habitually. But as soon as he threw it out, he had a bad feeling about it. The thin, gray-haired old man suddenly raised his head and frowned. His eyes were like lightning as he looked over. Yi Sure you had no time to dodge and met the 2 gazes. Suddenly, he let out a muffled groan and his chest heaved up and down. He spat out a mouthful of blood. His body swayed and he almost fell off the high platform. The old man didn't withdraw his gaze and said indifferently, "Is the scenery here very good? Why don't I think so?" Yi Xiu did not dare to reply. He lowered his head and cleverly concealed the hatred in his eyes. "Today, we are only spectating the battle. Once the battle is over, everyone from the aristocratic families will follow me back to upper 3 heavens." The white-bearded old man said slowly, "If anyone disregards the rules and tries to escape or has other motives, don't blame us for not giving face to the big clans of upper 3 heavens." After these words were said stiffly, the 3 of them strode in without caring about the changes in the faces of the young and old men of the aristocratic families. Then, a high platform of ice and snow was erected. The enforcers of upper 3 heavens are indeed domineering. Chu Yang said in a low voice, "Looks like these guys will definitely be dealt with when they return. The big clans will also have to pay a price to settle this matter." Mo Tianji said, "Looking at the current situation, it seems so." Then Tianji, before they leave, "Is it possible for us to add fuel to the fire of the enforcers of upper 3 heavens?" Chu Yang said thoughtfully, Emotionji pondered and said, "It's a little difficult." Difficult doesn't mean that there's no way. Chu Yang touched his chin and said, "For example, the Shi clan of upper three heavens." Emotionji's eyes lit up. "Today's battle is a grudge of upper three heavens. Therefore I won't interfere." The white-bearded elder said indifferently, "It's just a battle. If you want to fight, you can start now." Tianbu Hui's spirits were lifted and he said, "Yes, I will follow your instructions." Then, he turned his head and looked at Chu Yang and the others. He said, "Brother Chu, brother, shall we start now? Everyone is here. If you delay any longer, you won't be able to escape the fate of defeat." "Who told you that everyone is here?" Chu Yang said. Emotionji smiled warmly and said, "Your people are all here, but not all of our people are here yet." "Your people aren't here?" Tianbu Hui's expression changed and he said, "Other than the people here, what other forces do you have?" The words of this Tian clan are like farts. "I'm not here yet and you say that everyone is here?" Following a shout, 3 figures rushed up the mountain like shooting stars. Ao Tianxing was overjoyed. He stood up and said, "Elder." They were the 3 martial monarchs of the Ao clan. They had come at this critical moment. Mo Tianji's calm expression finally relaxed a little. With the arrival of these 3 martial monarchs, they were even with the number of martial monarchs. The only thing to worry about was the martial monarch of the Shi clan. However, there was nothing they could do about it. They had already done what they could. This battle is not about victory or defeat. It's about life and death. Although Tianbu Hui's expression changed slightly, he still felt that he had the advantage in terms of strength. Therefore, he didn't take it to heart. He raised his hands and bowed, "Elders, please be our witnesses. The living will be the king. Those who die will be the bones of the dead." The white-bearded elder nodded slightly. As the enforcers of the law, they were the best candidates for the arbitration. The white-bearded elder looked at Chu Yang and the others and said, "Does anyone have any objections?" Emotionji said casually, "A battle is about life and death. Why would we be interested in thinking about victory or defeat? Since Tianbu Hui and the others want to die, we will fulfill their wishes." The white-bearded elder's eyes focused. After a long while, he said slowly, "Good. Good spirit." Tianbu Hui's words could be said to be asking for their opinions because the other party didn't agree. They had to go through the judges to ask. But Emotionji's words were the final word. The loser could forget about leaving this place alive. Both sides had reached a consensus. Even the martial monarchs could only watch. The white-bearded old man was clearly a little surprised. There were many martial monarch-level experts in both camps, and countless martial emperor-level experts. However, these 2 young youths had taken up the leading and decision-making positions. It could be said that this wasn't strange, especially since both sides were led by such young men. This was even more confusing. Chu Yang and Emotionji looked at each other. Chu Yang's eyes were calm, but he could see the anxiety in Emotionji's eyes. From the arrangement of both sides, Chu Yang's side would definitely win the battle between martial monarchs and martial monarchs. However, the battle between martial monarchs was hard to predict. As for the battle between martial monarchs, Chu Yang's side couldn't find an opponent who could match up to the other party. Emotionji was worried about the final battle between martial monarchs. Chu Yang looked up at the sky. His heart was heavy. Why wasn't Dukyu here yet? At the same time, he was worried. The Shao clan's people would be here if Dukyu came. Would they recognize him? Chu Yang had received a message from Dukyu after the battle that day. Then Dukyu had left. Chu Yang had felt relieved. However, he hadn't expected that Dukyu wouldn't show up until now. If Tan Tan had been stimulated and suddenly awakened, he would have had a chance to win. However, Tan Tan's identity couldn't be kept a secret. Countless experts would have come to deal with him. This included the martial monarchs. Then he would have become the enemy of the entire world. Therefore, Tan Tan couldn't go crazy. Moreover, that thing wasn't under his control. Then there was Chu Yang. If the sword spirit possessed him, Chu Yang sighed. "I'm afraid that guy will quit on the spot if I let the sword spirit possess my body again. I've been soaking in the soul-quenching spring every day for such a long time. But I've had very little effect. In fact, the sword spirit would nag every day until he was out of strength. So, there was no need to ask him to fight again. Chu Yang frowned and thought silently. Suddenly, a humming sound was heard from the foot of the mountain. Then this sound reached halfway up the mountain. Then another humming sound was heard. It seemed as if the air had exploded. Even that white-bearded old man was shocked by this sound. It was because this was a sound that only top-notch experts could understand and experience. The speed was too fast. The friction between the clothes and the air had caused the air to explode. However, the clothes weren't damaged. Therefore, such a sound could be heard. Even a monarch-level expert wouldn't have such a cultivation level. So, he wouldn't be able to make such a sound. Everyone looked up at the same time. A figure flashed like a ghost. Everyone had an illusion at the same time. A person was approaching at an extremely fast speed. Then, he suddenly stood in front of them. It was a complete shock from the mind to the eyes. A green-robed man's silhouette was quietly standing at the entrance. It was a young man. His face was handsome. He was dressed in a green robe. He looked elegant and carefree. Just by standing there, he already exuded an otherworldly aura. It was as if he didn't care about anything. Although there were thousands of experts in front of him, he didn't seem to care about any of them. However, he didn't look down on them or ignore them. Because in his eyes, everyone was like a white cloud. They were like a cool breeze. Then this young man smiled lightly and said, "I'm not late, am I?" His green robe fluttered. He walked forward slowly and said, "It hasn't started yet. Looks like I'm not late." He was actually answering his own question. He was enjoying himself. Looking at his expression, it was as if he was attending a banquet. Everyone had sat down and the dishes had been served. However, no one had touched their chopsticks. He was so relaxed and satisfied. Chu Yang squinted his eyes and said with a smile, "Looks like you've come at the right time." The green-robed man wrinkled his nose and revealed a beautiful smile. He heaved a sigh of relief and said, "I was afraid that you would have killed everyone by the time I arrived. That would be too regretful." Tianbu Hui exclaimed, "Duke Yu?" Chapter 691. Duke Yu raised his eyebrows and said, "Ah, there's actually someone who recognizes me." Chu Yang smiled bitterly. He didn't expect Duke Yu to appear in such an ostentatious manner. He was still thinking about how he would hide his identity and come here. "Duke Yu, is your dark bamboo also participating in the battle of the upper three heavens?" Tianbu Hui only felt a bitter taste in his mouth. If the dark bamboo came, there wouldn't even be a need to fight this battle. "The dark bamboo won't participate, but I will." Duke Yu said, "Am I not from the upper three heavens? Do you dare to say that I can't participate?" Tianbu Hui opened his eyes wide. Then he sighed and said, "It's great that Brother Yu is participating in this competition. How can I dare to say no?" "Since you don't dare to say it, then why don't you shut up?" Duke Yu looked at him from the corner of his eyes. "Are you farting with your mouth open? You're talking to me like this. Do you think I like you? Do you believe that I can beat your face into a pulp?" He didn't expect the other party to be one of the top experts in the upper three heavens to say such a thing. Tianbu Hui's face instantly twisted. It turned red and purple. "Brother Yu." Chu Yang didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "It's not that my temper isn't good. The key is that this guy needs to be taught a lesson." Duke Yu said casually and politely. "Look at his unlucky face. He probably thinks that I'm here to help them. If I don't teach him a lesson, it'll be difficult to deal with him once he comes over. My biggest weakness is that I'm too easy to talk to." Chu Yang smiled bitterly. "Who would dare to talk to a temperamental person like you? They definitely wouldn't dare to make things difficult for you. You're too easy to talk to?" When Chu Yang heard this, he only felt that his internal organs were cramping. "Yes, you're too easy to talk to. So easy to talk to that no one dares to talk to you." Clearly, Duke Yu's high-profile appearance today wasn't purely for this matter. Because in the next moment he shouted, "Which Shao clan of the upper three heavens is here?" On the stage, the bumpkin Shao Juechen gave a simple and honest laugh. "I'm from the Shao family. But I wonder what business do you have with our Xiao family? I say, why do all of you bastards have the ability to open your mouths and fart? The two people beside you had once participated in the siege of Old Man. Now, he actually dared to lie through his teeth? Do you really not recognize me? Duke Yu raised his eyebrows and said unhappily. Beside Xiao Juechen, an elder stood up and laughed coldly. Back then, you were a pervert at the bottom of the sword, yet you still dare to stir up trouble today? Go back and tell your clan head that after today's battle, I will kill my way to the upper three heavens and look for your Xiao clan. Duke Yu turned his head after he finished speaking. He didn't care about what they were saying anymore. He walked to Chu Yang's side and sat down. Then he said, "Why haven't you started? Didn't they come here to kill people? Even if everyone is glaring at him, he won't die." Chu Yang was rendered speechless by him. Mo Tianji finally relaxed. He calmed down and arranged for the battle. Then, Mo Tianji and Tianbu Hui made some adjustments to the battle formation. Since the enforcers were going to be the arbiters, how could they not know? Even Chu Yang broke out in cold sweat when he saw the rules of the battle that were finally set. This was a crazy battle. It would only end when the other party was completely annihilated or had no power to retaliate. There were a total of 11 battles in this battle. 1 martial saint battle, 2 martial monarchs, 3 martial emperors and 4 martial kings. To explain, martial emperors definitely couldn't appear in a battle between martial kings. Martial monarchs and martial saints definitely couldn't appear in a battle between martial emperors. No matter how many martial emperors you had, they would be divided into 3 teams. The team leaders had to be martial kings too. The 3 teams would fight 1 battle each. Then, the survivors from both sides would gather for the final battle. One side had to be completely annihilated. The martial emperors would be divided into 2 teams. Each team would take 1 battle and the survivors would fight to the death. There would only be 1 martial monarch team. There would be a battle royale and a final battle. The martial saints would fight to determine the winner. In the end, all the survivors would participate in the battle royale regardless of their level. The losing side would be thrown into the lake of despair. The winning side would be able to leave the mountain and take over all the forces of the other side. Naturally, before the battle started, if both sides were interested in a one-on-one battle, they could issue a challenge beforehand. They would fight to the death and settle old grudges. All in all the rules pointed to the cruelest point: live or die. This was the rule of the final battle. It was the rule of the final battle at the Lake of Despair. Everyone would be treated the same. The white-bearded elder stood up and read the rules out loud. His voice was deafening and reverberated in the air for a long time. Below, there was complete silence. There were close to 3,000 people. They represented the top forces of the 3 heavens. However, no one said a word. There were 3,000 people present. At least 2,000, or even 2,500, would be thrown into the lake. Was he one of them? Who dared to say that his body wouldn't be thrown into the lake? Even martial monarchs and martial saints wouldn't dare to say this. A tragic atmosphere arose spontaneously. Everyone's breathing became heavy, and their eyes were bloodshot. In the silence, Dong Wushang suddenly shouted. He stepped out from the crowd and walked to the center. He pointed his black saber and shouted, "Li Xiong Tu! Come out and accept your death." Before the battle, Dong Wushang wanted to fight one-on-one. It was obvious that he didn't want to take advantage of Li Xiong Tu's. Dong Wushang was tall and sturdy. With his saber in hand, he looked like an army of thousands of horses. Profound and pure, towering like a mountain, the sharpness of the blade is unparalleled. The expression of the white-robed elder at the top froze. The way he looked at Dong Wushang changed slightly. However, the skinny old man beside him spoke the words that were in his heart. What a bold spirit! I didn't expect such a person to appear in the 3 heavens. Dong Wushang. Li Batian's eyes were filled with worry. He looked at Dong Wushang and suddenly sighed. It's a pity that such a person was born in the 3 heavens. With a loud and explosive roar, Li Xiong Tu flew out. His burly body landed on the snowy ground with a loud boom. White snow flew out in all directions as he laughed loudly. Dong Wushang, even if you don't mention it, I will. If we don't fight, I won't die in peace. Dong Wushang laughed. That's exactly what I was thinking. Li Xiong too, watch my saber. With a loud shout, his black saber shot into the air. Suddenly, a black galaxy formed from saber light appeared. In this world of ice and snow, it was even more eye-catching. Dong Wushang seemed to be rushing forward with his bare hands. However, the galaxy of saber light followed his body and surged forward. Even the saber and the person, including the entire mass of air, seemed to have transformed into a moving saber mountain. It rushed faster and faster, and its momentum became greater and greater. In the end, the saber light filled the sky. In this battle of life and death, Dong Wushang's fighting spirit, as if he had met his match, allowed him to unleash a saber attack that he had never unleashed before. This saber attack was the peak of Dong Wushang's power in the past. However, this peak saber attack became the opening statement of today's battle. On the high platform, the great aristocratic families and the enforcers couldn't help but widen their eyes. Chen Feichen exclaimed in disbelief, "Saber Emperor." This low exclamation of surprise was the thought of all the spectators from the great clans. Before Dong Wushang made his move, everyone only felt that this youth was extraordinary. However, he was just extraordinary. After all, Dong Wushang's cultivation was nothing in their eyes. With their clan's power and resources, it wasn't difficult for them to forcefully raise a 14 to 15-year-old youth to the level of an emperor. In fact, it wasn't even difficult for an emperor to surpass the 5th stage. However, with Dong Wushang's weak cultivation, his saber attack was able to draw the power of heaven and earth. He was able to make heaven and earth tremble and fight. This was a cultivation that only a saber emperor could have. An emperor wasn't scary. However, once a weapon was added to an emperor, it would become one in 10,000. Furthermore, that was referring to the spear emperor and the whip emperor. However, this was a saber emperor. The second emperor in the entire heavens, second only to the sword emperor. However, the sword was the emperor, not the emperor. Therefore, a saber emperor was the number 1 emperor in the heavens. Such a saber emperor couldn't be lacking in either of these aspects. How can an ordinary emperor-level expert, who can reach such a level purely through the improvement of his martial power, compare with him? Even in the upper 3 heavens, there weren't many people like him. However, there wasn't a single one as young as Dong Wushang. Everyone's heart trembled 3 times. Today they really saw a treasure. Li Xiong too roared. His body, which was already extremely muscular, seemed to have swelled up again. With a sound of waves, an indescribably wide broadsword suddenly appeared in his hand. This sword was 2 feet wide, 1 foot long and 1 foot thick. Looking at its weight, it was definitely not inferior to Dong Wushang's saber. Li Xiongtu's eyes widened. His body spun, and a mountain of swords spun towards Dong Wushang's myriad saber storm. A sharp sound suddenly rang out from Li Xiongtu's body. The blade of the sword cut through the air, and actually turned the 30 feet around Li Xiongtu into a gloomy green color. However, with this move, the big clans and law enforcement officers on the high platform couldn't help but sigh in unison. Both of these young men were heavenly geniuses. No matter which one of them died today, it would be a great loss. Although Li Xiongtu's sword hadn't reached the level of a sword emperor, it was so heavy that it wouldn't be inferior to a real sword emperor. The fighting style of these 2 people was bold, and they didn't care about their own safety. They were majestic and explosive. Looking at the fight between these 2 people, everyone instantly understood one thing. This was a fight between men. Just one look at it would make one's blood boil. Only a battle like this was worthy of the word, man. Dong Wushang and Li Xiongtu roared at the same time. Then, the mountain of swords and mountain of swords collided fiercely. Boom, boom. An almost unimaginable force suddenly burst out in all directions. Dong Wushang and Li Xiongtu didn't move at all, but blood spurted out of their 7 orifices. Under their feet, the ground that was harder than star iron couldn't be damaged by divine weapons. However, with a few cracking sounds, a few wide cracks actually appeared. Chapter 692. Violent air currents shot out crazily. They rushed in all directions. If not for the fact that they had used their cultivation to protect the ice and snow platforms built by the big clans, the impact at this moment would have caused all of them to collapse. The big clans who were originally disdainful of this battle revealed serious expressions at the same time as they watched this battle attentively. This was a battle between real men. Good. Dong Wuxiang looked up to the sky and roared fiercely. His head of black hair broke free with a bang and danced wildly in the wind and snow. His 2 legs were firmly nailed to the ground and he stood there motionlessly like a mountain. Awesome! Li Xiongtu roared. The muscles all over his body tightened and his eyes shone with an even stronger battle intent than before. The stronger the enemy, the more excited I am. Dong Wuxiang and Li Xiongtu were both such people. The 2 of them didn't allow the other to rest, nor did they allow themselves to rest. They raised their black sabers and broadswords at the same time and smashed them together fiercely again. The sparks that flew up were almost able to burn. Immediately after, the sound of banging and banging could be heard. Every time they collided, there would be a column of snow that shot up into the sky. First, Dong Wuxiang slashed 10 times consecutively like a storm. Li Xiongtu took a step back and slashed again and again. The battle circle quickly shifted towards Li Xiongtu's side. Then, Li Xiongtu roared and slashed back 10 times with his broadsword. Dong Wuxiang took each slash and took a step back. He also took 10 steps back consecutively. The extremely violent sounds of collisions almost deafened the ears of the spectators. Suddenly, the 2 of them stopped at the same time. Then one leaned on his saber and the other leaned on his sword. The 2 of them were 50 feet apart, panting violently. Then, they suddenly burst into laughter at the same time. It was too satisfying. Such a battle made the 2 of them covered in blood. They were all burning up. Although their arms were already sore and the web between their thumb and forefinger had already burst open. Blood was still flowing from their 7 orifices, but their battle intent didn't decrease at all. Instead, it burned even more fiercely. Chu Yang frowned as he watched this battle. He felt his blood boiling and burning and his hands involuntarily clenched. Suddenly, a fragrant wind came from beside him. He turned around. Emole's face was full of anxiety. She looked at Dong Wuxiang in the arena, her eyes full of pain and worry. Don't worry. Wuxiang will win for sure. Chu Yang said with certainty, I have confidence in him. You have to have more confidence. Emole nodded her head vigorously. However, she bit her lips until they bled. Again. Dong Wuxiang roared. Again. Li Xiongtu laughed maniacally. Saber comes heartless. Dong Wuxiang laughed wildly. Then he rose from the ground with his dark saber. He suddenly rose to a height of 70 feet. Then he turned into a black meteor. Suddenly there fell. It became a whirlwind. Stupor of the sword. Li Xiongtu roared. His body circled around the ground, and suddenly, a pagoda of sword light formed by countless sword tips appeared. It surged up layer by layer, and quickly reached the 7th layer. Then, it suddenly spun up, and flew out of the ground to meet the thunderous saber in the air. Merciless heaven! Saber and sword beams shot out one after another. The sound of saber and sword clashing against each other resounded for a while. Then, a black silhouette let out a long and violent howl. It bounced into the air. Another burly figure staggered back on the ground. The one who bounced into the air was Dong Wuxiang. This time, he bounced back a full 30 to 40 feet high. His tall and majestic figure seemed to cover the entire sky at this moment. Saber breaks heartless. Dong Wuxiang flipped in midair. A thick saber light shot out from his dark saber, and Dong Wuxiang swooped down again with this saber. Ah! Li Xiongtu roared. The same pagoda of sword light once again appeared in layers. There was a loud boom. Li Xiongtu somersaulted 70 feet away. His hair was disheveled, and he was bleeding from his 7 orifices. However, his legs were still firmly on the ground, and his hands were holding his sword steadily. Dong Wuxiang flew up again, and let out another long howl. He spat out the turbid air in his chest, and his eyes were bloodshot. That was the unbearable burden caused by the continuous tremors. However, his eyes were still radiating fanaticism. He swooped down again. Saber breaks heartless. Dong Wuxiang had obviously entered a state of excitement. His long saber was boiling in the air like a living thing, and 7 saber lights shot out at the same time. Sword breaks vast sea. Li Xiong-tu's eyes flashed with joy that no one else could understand. He roared, "I, Li Xiong-tu, have only wished for this battle in my entire life. Delightful, delightful." The 2 figures crossed each other, and each ran for 40 feet on the snowy ground. Finally, they stood still. The distance between them was close to 1,000 feet. "Let's decide the victor with 1 saber. Li Xiong-tu." Dong Wuxiang smiled disdainfully and roared while stroking his saber. As he spoke, his long hair fluttered in the air as if it had a life of its own. He was like a god, and his lofty sentiments were unparalleled. Life and death with 1 saber. Dong Wuxiang. Li Xiong-tu's eyes flashed with unconcealable respect. "If I kill you, I will definitely keep your dark saber and make it a treasure that will never leave my side. I will drink with the saber at dawn and dusk. I will drink with the saber every spring and autumn. Even if the netherworld is far away, I will drink with you every day." Dong Wuxiang laughed wildly and said in a low voice, "But you are destined to be disappointed. You are wrong. You practice the heartless saber path. But the heartless saber can't kill me." Li Xiong-tu said sincerely, "So today, you will definitely die under my saber." Dong Wuxiang's saber comes from the heartless heavens. Saber breaks the heartless heavens, and saber breaks the heartless heavens. These 3 moves had already made Li Xiong-tu conclude that Dong Wuxiang practiced the heartless saber technique. But the vast sea sword technique that he practiced was the nemesis of the heartless saber technique. Dong Wuxiang laughed. "Watch my saber." Suddenly he started to charge. Li Xiong-tu laughed. His sword flicked into his hand, and he started to charge toward the opponent. This move would decide life and death. This was the tacit understanding between the 2. And also the respect for the opponent. Saber comes from the heartless heavens. Dong Wuxiang shouted, and his mind suddenly entered a state of emptiness. He smiled and said, "Heartless saber technique? Li Xiong-tu, watch this move of mine. It is heartless but sentimental." This saber came from the heartless heavens. So Dong Wuxiang named it, "Saber comes from the heartless heavens." Li Xiong-tu was unmoved. He laughed and said, "Come on." The 2 figures, with saber light like a mountain and sword light like an ocean, collided like a whirlwind. There was a loud explosion. Ice shards and snow smoke rose up violently, blocking everyone's vision. It didn't fall for a long time. "It's over." Ling Han Shui, who was on the high platform, sighed regretfully. "It's over." The white-bearded enforcer sighed softly and said in a low voice, "It's a pity." Li Batian looked down anxiously. His face was full of hope. "Li Xiong-tu, please don't die." "It's over," Chu Yang said softly. "How is it?" Emily asked anxiously, "How is Dong Wuxiang?" Chu Yang smiled and said, "Actually, you should be asking me how is my husband?" Emily spat. Her face turned red, but she relaxed immediately. She knew that if Dong Wuxiang was defeated and killed, Chu Yang wouldn't be so relaxed. Since Chu Yang was joking with her, Dong Wuxiang must have won. If it were an ordinary woman, she might have cheered and encouraged her man when he was fighting with all his might. But Emily didn't. She also wanted to. But she restrained herself with all her might. She knew that if she opened her mouth, it would be a great insult to the 2 men present. A battle between real men didn't need any cheers. They didn't need any encouragement. Even if it was to boost morale, it would make the winner feel like he had an unfair advantage. Emily could only let her heart curl up in worry, but she didn't want to make a sound. For her man's pride. Although Chu Yang said this, he wasn't confident in his heart. Such an intense battle. Even the enforcers' cultivation. They didn't see who won and who lost. How could Chu Yang tell? But Chu Yang had absolute confidence in Dong Wuxiang. He would definitely win. He didn't need a reason. Li Xiong Tuesday Chu Yang didn't deny that he was a hero, but he still believed that Dong Wushang would win. Everyone, including Gu Duxing, Luo Kadi GMO and the others, looked very confident. He won. Although they couldn't see it. But he won. This was for sure. Before the dust settled, a sorrowful cry rang out. It was a cry that anyone who heard it couldn't bear to hear. With this call, Li Qia's heart sank. It could be said that it was extremely tragic. Olair's delicate body trembled, and she was on the verge of collapsing. Tears flowed out quickly and her face was full of despair. This was Li Xiongtu's voice. It was a battle of life and death. Li Xiongtu could make a sound, so he didn't die. Then, wasn't Dong Wushang the one who died? But why? Li Xiongtu screamed. His voice was so miserable that it made one's soul tremble. The snow and smoke finally dissipated. The arena was 100 feet apart. One was standing and the other was sitting. The one standing was Dong Wushang and the one sitting was Li Xiongtu. Both of them didn't die. The broadsword in Li Xiongtu's hand had already turned into pieces of broken metal and turned into nothingness. The dark saber in Dong Wushang's hand couldn't be called a saber anymore. It should be called a saw. The one who screamed was Li Xiongtu's. Blood flowed out from almost 7 to 8 places, but he didn't die. Dong Wushang didn't die either. But Li Xiongtu's legs had already been broken by Dong Wushang. He sat on the ground and screamed, "I lost. But why didn't you kill me? Why didn't you kill me? Dong Wushang, this was a battle of life and death. Why didn't you kill me?" Dong Wushang was expressionless. He slowly sheathed his dark saber and said, "Brother Li, I said that the last saber strike would determine victory and defeat, not a battle of life and death. You were the one who said it. Are you looking down on me?" Li Xiongtu looked at him angrily. "Are you looking down on me?" Dong Wushang frowned. He was a little embarrassed. "Brother Li, after this battle, don't you understand? Between us, what is there to look down on? We are the same kind of people. Since you think highly of me, then kill me. Then kill me." When Li Xiongtu heard this, a look of glory appeared on his face. He shouted, "Quick, kill me." Dong Wushang sighed. He didn't answer and turned to leave. There were also 7 to 8 places on his back and chest that were bleeding. But he didn't seem to notice. Li Xiongtu let out a loud roar. He slapped the ground with his hands and used the last of his strength to fly up. He quickly caught up with Dong Wushang and fiercely fell in front of him. He roared, "Dong Wushang, if you think highly of me, if you think of me as your opponent, then pull out your saber and kill me. Kill me." He looked up to the sky and shouted, "I, Li Xiongtu, am a great man. How can I live like a coward?" Chapter 693. Duke Yu smiled and said, "If that's the case, the Li clan will be dragged into a ditch by you all. However, it would be great if the same method was used on the Shao clan. Seeing those fellows foolishly running around in circles, I feel so much better." Mo Tianji said in shock, "But the Shao clan has nothing to do with this." Duke Yu squinted and said, "It's not like I'm asking you to wither away now. You'll have to do it in the future. As long as there's a chance, you'll have to do it. If there's no chance, you'll have to create one." Chu Yang and Mo Tianji looked at each other and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At the same time, Chu Yang was moved. Mo Tianji's plan was ingenious. But the most ingenious thing was the person he used at the end. Also, in the entire 3 heavens, only 2 people knew that he was the master of the Calamity Sword. They were Mo Tianji and Duke Yu. And Mo Tianji just happened to look for Duke Yu. How did Mo Tianji know that Duke Yu knew that he was the master of the Calamity Sword? After arranging this, Mo Tianji said, "Brother Chu, next is the King level battle royale. How about you take command and participate in the battle?" Chu Yang nodded slowly and said, "Okay." The King level battle royale was the battle with the highest chance of victory. Among the brothers, Gu Duxing and GMO had already rushed into the Emperor level. Chu Yang should have rushed into the Emperor level long ago, but because of the restriction of the 4th fragment of the Calamity Sword, He couldn't enter, so he stayed at the king level. In addition, GMO, Luo Kadi Rei Butong, Xie Dan Qiong, Ao Xie Yun, and Tan Tan were all at the peak of the king level. They were only one step away from the emperor level. It could be said that this was the battle that the brothers gathered the most. Chu Yang was the best person to be the commander. Although Mo Tianji deliberately wanted to protect Chu Yang was indeed the one that everyone wanted. Moreover, the biggest benefit of this arrangement was that the big clans would speculate about the Master of Tribulation Sword. Who would have thought that the Master of Tribulation Sword, who would have thought that the world-famous Master of Tribulation Sword would mingle with a group of king-level masters and participate in the battle royale? No matter what, he should be used as the finale, right? Be careful. Mo Tianji said. I'll go check on Wuxiang first. Chu Yang nodded and walked into the tent. At this time, the wounds on Dong Wuxiang's body must have been bandaged. After taking the heavy pill, there shouldn't be any more problems. During this time, Mo Tianji had collected all the elixirs that the great clans had brought with them. In name, it was a unified management. However, all the high-end medicinal ingredients had been taken away by Mo Tianji. All the great clans knew that this battle was a matter of life and death. Wan Si's injury was a matter of life and death. Therefore, almost all of them brought out the best treasures from their clans. The quality of this batch of medicinal herbs could be said to be extremely high-end. It didn't take much effort for him to obtain a lot of incomplete heavy pills. Just as he was about to enter, he heard an argument coming from inside. Don't move. Men and women shouldn't touch each other. Why did you take off my clothes? If you don't take off your clothes and report, how do you apply the medicine? But can't you find someone else? For example, men? I don't trust anyone else. I'm even more worried about men who are careless. But with you here, I'm worried about Chuan. What are you worried about? I'm a girl and I'm not afraid. It's because you're a girl that I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? Don't come over. Be good, don't move. Don't come over. If you come over, I'll scream, scream. Even if you scream yourself hoarse, no one will care about you. I'm so angry. Someone come. Dong Wuxiang started to yell. Chu Yang held his stomach and squatted at the door. His whole body was convulsing. Looking through the half-open door, he saw Dong Wuxiang holding his belt tightly with one hand and his clothes with the other. He looked very nervous. He was holding medicine on his shoulder with one hand and trying to take off his clothes with the other. Seeing Chu Yang enter in such a messy and twisted state, Dong Wuxiang immediately looked as if he had seen his savior. Bus, save me. With a pft, Chu Yang choked and coughed repeatedly. After coughing for a while, he said, "Let me do it." He went forward and took off Dong Wuxiang's clothes. Dong Wuxiang screamed. You go out first, however, Chu Yang said, "Quick, do it." Mo giggled and bandaged Dong Wuxiang's wounds. She wrapped bandages on him one by one. Dong Wuxiang's eyes were dull and his whole body was stiff. He didn't move at all. Occasionally, when Mo's warm fingers touched his skin, he actually trembled a little. Chu Yang found it funny. He didn't expect that Dong Wuxiang, a man who was bold and domineering, would be so conservative and shy when it came to relationships. He was even worse than a virgin. He was even more concerned than a virgin. After quickly bandaging his wounds, Chu Yang took out an incomplete version of the heavy pill and stuffed it into Dong Wuxiang's mouth. He held back his laughter and said, "It's okay now." Then he slipped away. He didn't care that Dong Wuxiang's face was already red. First, he bandaged Dong Wuxiang's external wounds so that others could see that his injuries were very serious. As for his internal injuries, who would be able to tell? Then, they would definitely not suspect the Tribulation Sword Master. Now that the big clans and law enforcement officers were here, Chu Yang didn't dare to be careless at all. At first, Mo thought it was funny. As a man, why were you so shy? But slowly, her heart trembled. As she looked at Dong Wuxiang, she felt even more emotional. She felt more and more how valuable this man was. When facing enemies, he was wild and domineering. But when it came to relationships, he was delicate and restrained. He was even extremely conservative. No wonder when I said those words on purpose. His reaction was so intense. So he was really Wushang? Looked at Dong Wushang in a daze and pursed her lips. What's wrong? Dong Wushang hurriedly put on his clothes and asked with a red face. You're really good. As expected, Dong Wushang let out a cry and his face turned red again. On the other side, Tian Bu Hui was discussing with the Black Devil. Elder, where's Brother Black? I haven't seen him for a while. Where did he go? The Black Devil said coldly, he's naturally hiding in the dark. Don't tell me you think that we Black Devils always fight head-on when we assassinate? Tian Bu Hui sighed and said, what a pity. I wanted him to lead the martial kings in this battle. With his methods, he'll definitely win this battle. The Black Devil stared at him and said eerily, you want him to die, right? Tian Bu Hui said calmly, since it's a battle, how can there be no casualties? But we'll definitely not lose this battle. The Black Devil snorted, he's already found a good position and is ready to strike. Now, you can make your own arrangements. The Black Devil clan will only cooperate. Tian Bu Hui smiled and agreed. Then he retreated. He thought to himself, if I don't destroy the entire Black Devil clan here, I'm not worthy of being called the heavens. The battle has officially begun. The white-bearded old law enforcement officer gave the order and sighed. He could tell that the clans of the three heavens had already used all their trump cards in today's battle. It could be said that all the elites were gathered here. With his status, it was a waste for him to preside over such a battle. However, when he saw the few young martial kings, he couldn't bear to do it. What a pity! These few young martial kings weren't even 20 years old. They had a bright future ahead of them. The first battle, martial kings? Following these words, a long howl could be heard from the other side. Awoo, it's finally my turn. Luo Kudi laughed. He was actually very excited. GMO also wanted to howl to vent his excitement. However, just as he howled, Huyen Aobo pulled his ear. The howl turned into a moan. Oh, Huyen Aobo didn't retreat. Instead, she took a step forward and stood beside GMO. She was only half a shoulder behind him. This was a position that only couples could have. I'll fight with you. In life, I'll be with you. In death, I'll be with you. She didn't say anything. However, by taking this step, she was announcing to the world that they were husband and wife. They would live and die together. As a woman, she didn't need to participate in the battle. She only needed to wait. However, she stood up. G-Mo's face was filled with blood. His heart palpitated. His eyes shone brightly. He quietly reached out and held Huyen Aobo's hand. He squeezed it gently and didn't let go. The two of them stood together. At the same time, they felt that no one in this world could separate them. Rui Budong and Tan Tan looked at each other and smiled. Then, they stepped forward calmly. And me? Xie Dan Feng squeezed out and stood beside Tan Tan. Go back. Tan Tan said angrily. I'm not going back. Xie Dan Feng looked at him stubbornly. Their eyes met. They didn't give in to each other. This is how it is to follow you. Xie Dan Feng bit her lip. If I live, I will experience more pain and struggle than what I am experiencing now. I know all that. However, I still want to follow you. If we die in this battle, you and I will avoid the pain of having to make a choice in the future. But if we survive this battle, I will carve myself into your heart, so that you won't become you. Forget. Xie Dan Feng said in a daze, I like how you protect me. I want to experience it again. She paused. Then, she suddenly shouted with all her strength. Her sharp voice almost pierced through the clouds and shook the clouds above the snowy peak. If I, Xie Dan Feng, can survive this battle, I will marry you and be your wife. I will give birth to your children. I will wash your clothes and cook for you. I will do anything for you. She finally shouted again, for you. I will do anything for you. This stubborn and beautiful girl faced thousands of people from both sides. She faced the spectators from the dominating clans. She faced the law enforcers. She faced the vast sea of clouds and the eternal sky. Abandoning all modesty, he shouted loudly. She exposed her best wishes, her most desired things, her most solemn promises, and her most precious girl's heart in front of thousands of people without any scruples. Her eyes flashed. She wasn't shy at all. Only bravery. If you live, I will accompany you. If you die, I will accompany you. If you struggle, I will accompany you. No matter what you do, I will accompany you. I will engrave myself in your heart. I will say that I love you in the face of everything. This is my love. Even if the demon king awakens in your body. Even if the heavenly emperor is reborn in your body. Even if you won't be you in the future. Don't even think about forgetting me. Tan Tan's eyes suddenly turned red. Chapter 694. The entire place was silent. This was a crazy confession to this bold girl. In this world where men and women were forbidden from doing so, this was undoubtedly shocking. Deviating from the norm. But now, no one, including Tianbu Hui's side, had the slightest intention of criticizing or mocking him. After a long while, thousands of people suddenly shouted, "Good!" Instantly, everyone was excited. "Girl, we support you!" Countless people shouted loudly. On the ice platform of the Ling clan, Ling Hanshui looked down at Xie Danfeng and suddenly felt a wave of envy and admiration. She really admired her for being able to confess her feelings so bravely in front of so many people. As a girl, Ling Hanshui knew how much courage this required. If he really said that, then he would be cutting off all his escape routes for the rest of his life. There was only this path in front of her. Looking at Xie Danfeng, Ling Hanshui sighed secretly and thought, if only I could be as courageous as her back then. Yi Shiyu narrowed his eyes and looked down. No one knew what he was thinking. But Meng Se sighed deeply. Such a chaste girl, she's really a rare beauty. She dares to love and hate. Wouldn't it be a pity if she dies? He secretly asked himself, if the situation is urgent, would I dare to risk the anger of the law enforcement officers and be her protector again? The more he thought about it, the more hesitant he became. He couldn't help but sigh, just this hesitation of mine is far inferior to this girl. Down below, all the king-level experts spontaneously walked out from their respective camps and lined up behind GMO and the others. No one said a word. Ao Shiyun and Xie Danqiong stepped forward and stood side by side with GMO, Luo Kadi, Rui Badong and Tan Tan. All the sovereigns spontaneously gathered behind them. Everyone's eyes were calm and their breathing was slightly heavy. But standing behind these few martial kings, they seemed to have calmed down. The same process was going on the opposite side. Chu Yang was dressed in black. He didn't say a word and walked forward with his back straight. His footsteps were steady and his face was calm. Everywhere he passed, the crowd automatically opened up a path for him. They all felt that they had won this battle. Chu Yang walked step by step to the outside. He took a light step and stood out from the rest of the team. He turned around and looked at his own team. He raised his eyebrows and looked at everyone's faces. He quietly looked at them. Whoever his gaze landed on would feel a surge of hot blood. Chu Yang revealed a calm smile at the corners of his mouth. He slowly said, "The first battle will be ours. We have already gathered together. Listen, the other side is still urging us." The corners of his mouth turned back and he revealed a disdainful sneer. Immediately, his nervousness disappeared and he burst into laughter. They are urging us again? Chu Yang's back was facing the other side. As he listened to Tianbu Hui's shouts, he smiled faintly and said, "Look at those people. They've made our Grand Duke Tian so worried. Isk? Ha!" The laughter became louder and louder. Fighting with such an enemy. I really feel that I have an unfair advantage. Chu Yang stretched out his hand and pointed behind him. Then he said, "Look, are they our opponents?" More than 100 people shouted angrily at the same time. Following these few words and seeing the messy formation of the other side, everyone was full of confidence at this moment. Then, how long do we need to throw these guys into the lake of despair? Chu Yang looked at them with disdain. Suddenly, he raised his voice and shouted, 2 hours. Can we turn them into corpses and throw them into the lake of despair? He didn't even ask if they were confident. Could they win? Instead, he directly asked how long it would take to end the battle. This gave everyone a feeling. Is there a need to ask the result of this battle? We will definitely win. How can we use 2 hours? 1 hour is enough. One of the middle-grade king-level experts burst into loud laughter. Everyone laughed and said proudly, "Yes, how can we take so long to deal with them?" Good. Chu Yang cheered. Then he frowned and said, "But I feel that with so few people we still have to fight 4 rounds with them? Is there a need to go through so much trouble?" "It's too troublesome. 1 round is enough." "Is it? If it's just 1 round, the time is very tight." Chu Yang revealed a very fake worried look. He frowned and said, "What if?" "There's no what if. 1 round, 1 round, 1 round. Let's settle them in 1 round." Everyone started to clamor. "Good." Chu Yang shouted. He suddenly turned around and clasped his hands together. His eyes were like lightning, and his voice was sonorous. "Law enforcement officer, my brothers and I all agree that it's too troublesome for us to fight 4 rounds with only 1,000 people. Hence, on behalf of the 100 of us, I would like to request that we decide the outcome of the battle in 1 round." Decide the outcome of the battle in 1 round? The white-bearded enforcer frowned. "That's right. Just 1 round is enough to chop these guys into meat paste." Chu Yang said loudly. Then he turned around and asked, "Brothers, don't you think so?" "Yes." Everyone shouted at the top of their lungs. Everyone used all their strength, and their veins almost popped out. The white-bearded enforcer said, "Since that's the case, I need to ask for their opinion." Actually, there was no need to ask for their opinion. Since Chu Yang had proposed it, how could Tianbu Hui back down? If he didn't agree to it, his side's morale would be greatly affected. Hence, Tianbu Hui had to agree to it even if he didn't want to. Furthermore, even if he agreed to it, he would still be 1 step too late. "We agree." 1 round to decide the outcome of the battle. Tianbu Hui gritted his teeth and said fiercely. He was too indignant. He didn't expect Chu Yang to do this. "Look, we want to decide the outcome of the battle in 1 round. Look at how angry Tianbu is. He can't even speak properly. His face is red. Look at me? Why are you looking at me? Why are you staring at me? Tianbu Hui, you're not convinced? If you're not convinced, come up. Do you think you can kill me by staring at me?" Chu Yang mocked Tianbu Hui mercilessly. Every time he said a sentence, his team would burst into laughter. The laughter became louder and louder, and their emotions became more and more agitated. "Tianbu Hui, come up. Come up and die." More than 100 people laughed at the same time. In front of 2 armies, they were openly mocking the other side's leader. This kind of pleasure was unparalleled. Why would Tianbu Hui come up? He was the leader. His position was equivalent to Imo Tianji's. The battle of the entire team was under his command. If he came up, he would be an idiot. Bullshit. Tianbu Hui said angrily, "Why don't you ask Imo Tianji to come up as well?" Chu Yang shouted, "If you don't dare to come up, then so be it. Why are you dragging Imo Tianji into this? Tianbu Hui, do you have any shame? Tianbu Hui, do you have any shame?" GMO and Luo Kadi shouted at the same time. More than 100 people followed suit. It was as lively as the new year. In the eyes of outsiders, who would have thought that this was before the decisive battle? They would definitely think that this was a celebration. "Tianbu Hui doesn't dare to come up." Chu Yang laughed, "Such a coward. Coward. Bastard." GMO shouted, "Awu, dog ant. Everyone follow me and shout. Tianbu Hui. Coward." GMO shouted loudly. "Tianbu Hui. Coward." The 1,000 people echoed. "Tianbu Hui. You good for nothing." GMO once again shouted in high spirits. "Tianbu Hui. Coward." The 1,000 people once again followed in high spirits. "Damn, it rhymes so well." GMO laughed. "It seems like Tianbu Hui is born to be scolded." "Haha, Tianbu Hui." GMO shouted. "Coward." 1,000 people shouted. "Tianbu Hui." GMO shouted again. "Coward." They called out again. "Tianbu Hui." GMO danced with joy. "Bastard." The 1,000 people shouted with all their might. Haha, ow 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 ow. Chu Yang's aura had already reached its peak. However, Tianbu Hui's aura was extremely weak. This was especially so when Tianbu Hui organized a scolding and wanted to retaliate. However, more than 100 martial kings of the Black Devils remained silent and did not make a sound. Tianbu Hui was furious. He rushed in front of the Black Devils and said angrily, "Are all of you mute?" The Black Devils were furious. "You are unreasonable. Have you ever seen an assassin roaring before a battle? Tianbu Hui, do you know what you are doing?" Tianbu Hui had been angered by Chu Yang and had been rebuffed by the Black Devils. However, he could not voice out his grievances. He was so angry that he was about to explode. Beside him, the clan leader of the Li clan hurriedly tried to calm Tianbu Hui down. The Black Devils did not give up. They glared at him as if they wanted to eat him up. Furthermore, Tianbu Hui was obviously in the wrong. Why did you ask a bunch of assassins who always appeared in the dark to shout? Aren't you just making things difficult for yourself? Some people also thought that since they were fighting in broad daylight, they could no longer be described as assassins. Tianbu Hui was not wrong. On the other hand, the Black Devils were using this as a pretext to make a fuss. Wow, internal strife, internal strife. Luo Kadi was best at kicking people when they were down. Seeing that there were signs of internal strife, Luo Kadi laughed until his mouth was crooked. Ooh, internal strife. Pa. Ji Mo's ability to kick people when they were down was not bad. Everyone laughed together. On the opposite side, the martial kings who were already in formation turned around. Some of the assassins from the Black Devils could not help but curse. Does Tianbu Hui know how to command? Did this bastard have a screw loose? Damn it, asking a bunch of assassins to fight. Is he a bastard? Tianbu Hui's handsome face was swollen with anger. He knew that there was no point in trying to explain the situation. He could only start the battle quickly. Only then could he slowly get rid of this feeling. He waved his flag and shouted, "Go! Kill them all!" Almost 1,000 people from the opposite side immediately rushed over with a rumbling sound. Good timing. Chu Yang shook his hand and took out a red cloth. He tied it on his head. More than 100 people also took out red cloth and tied it on their heads. Kill them all. Chu Yang shouted, "They have finally come out. I thought that they would not dare to come." Ugh. More than 100 people roared and followed behind Chu Yang. They rushed out like a gust of wind. Kill. Chapter 695. The two groups of men and horses charged forward as if they were on the same page. Both sides' fighting spirit was equally high. But this scene, in the eyes of the people on the high platform, was a completely different matter. On Chu Yang's side, everyone had a ferocious smile on their faces as they charged forward with disdain and mockery. On the other hand, those on Tianbu Hui's side had a dark look on their faces as they charged forward silently. One side had a victorious smile while the other side had a furious silence. Naturally, there was a clear distinction between the two sides. Confidence. Only confident people would smile during a battle. Furthermore, the soldiers on Chu Yang's side did not panic. They formed groups of 2, 10, and 100 of them formed a triangle as they charged forward ferociously. On the other hand, the other side charged forward in a chaotic manner. Victory and defeat had been decided at this moment. This side has made ample preparations. Just by looking at their coordination, I can tell that this was not done in a short period of time. The white-bearded elder praised. The others nodded silently. However, the strength of both sides is about the same. Even if they win, it will be a Pyrrhic victory. The white-bearded elder concluded. That's right. If the winning side can have 200 survivors, it can be considered a glorious victory. The skinny elder said. Below the stage, Mo Tianji looked at the battle from afar. He revealed a slight smile on his face. Gu Duxing asked, "How is this battle?" Mo Tianji laughed in relief. "We are 100% confident of victory." 100% confident? Gu Duxing was shocked. He did not expect Mo Tianji to be so confident. Originally, the chances of victory were 50 to 50. In fact, our side's chances of victory were higher. After my team's coordination, our chances of victory were raised to 70%. After Chu Yang's morale boost, the other side's morale was low and they were not united. Our chances of victory were raised. Then, with Chu Yang, GMO, Luo Kadi, Rui Butong, Tan Tan and the others, our chances of victory were 100%. Furthermore, there was an unstable factor in the other side's camp. Mo Tianji smiled and said, "The Black Devil." He paused for a moment and laughed sinisterly. "As a father, I don't believe that the Black Devil would be so indifferent." Gu Duxing suddenly understood. While the two of them were talking, Chu Yang had already sped up. Immediately, GMO, Luo Kadi, and the others sped up and left the group. The battle formation here was like a huge triangle, and Chu Yang and the others were at the forefront of this huge cone. With this acceleration, it was like a huge triangular bow, shooting out sharp arrows. Such a formation was good for attacking. However, the initial contact was when the frontline troops were under the heaviest pressure, and when the King of Kings was injured the most. Chu Yang and the others had been dragged out of the team. This was equivalent to using the strength of a few people to bear the most powerful pressure at the beginning of the battle. They had crushed the enemy's first wave of attack. They would disrupt the enemy's formation. By the time the reinforcements arrived, they wouldn't have to endure that kind of pressure. Furthermore, they could directly use their absolute advantage to start the battle. But in this way, the pressure would be on Chu Yang and the others. In the blink of an eye, Chu Yang's sword was already in his hand. A round and dazzling beam of light shot out, and with a flip of his body, he merged into this vast and mighty sword light. A long roar came from the sword light. "The bones in my palm are as high as the mountains." In the eyes of outsiders, it seemed that this young man had used his ultimate move right from the start. The most powerful move. He was going all out. That was why Chu Yang shouted. Not only did he shout, but he also shouted loudly and mightily. Chuan, although these moves were from the Calamity Sword, they weren't from the Calamity Sword. They were created by Chu Yang himself. Furthermore, the power of these moves was not inferior to the Calamity Sword. You all came to watch the battle and look for the Calamity Sword's owner. But, Chuan, I'm standing right in front of you all, and I'm letting you all see me clearly, and I'm shouting deafeningly. But he doesn't use the Calamity Sword. If you can still find me like this, you're really seeing a ghost under the sun. The sword light spread out like an arc. Chu Yang, along with his sword, charged into the enemy group like a mad tiger. With a boom, it was as if a bullet had landed in the crowd. With a single touch, there were screams and screams. The sword was sharp and invincible. The sword move was like a demon, sharp and unstoppable. With one move, he tore open a big hole in the dense formation of the king-level masters who were charging over. Chu Yang laughed loudly and roared towards the sky. Under the sword, waves churn. The sword light trembled, and splashed out a wave of undulating silver light. It came from afar and came closer. Wave after wave, and each wave was higher than the previous one. Puff, 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 puff. Nearly 20 people were stabbed in the chest at the same time. Chu Yang's figure flew out, and he rushed over while stepping on the surging heads. The world of mortals is the path of ruthlessness. Chu Yang leaped for 170 feet. Wherever he passed, the sword light cleared a path of ruthlessness, and the waves surged. Kill all under the heavens. A loud shout. Woo! With a sound, the sword light seemed to have gone crazy. It directly formed a solid sword net that connected the sky and the earth in the midst of the enemy crowd. The sword light suddenly shot out. Just as Chu Yang shouted and made his move, everyone noticed his ferocity, especially the people from the big clans. Everyone's heart lit up. Then, they focused all their attention on Chu Yang. However, after seeing two moves, everyone was disappointed. This young man's sword move is strong, and it's obviously his trump card, but it's not the Calamity Sword. This young man is a talent, but he's not the Calamity Sword master. Since he's not, let's all turn our attention away. GMO and the others also started to shout crazily when Chu Yang launched the third move. The world of mortals is heartless. They rushed into the crowd from different directions. This was a disaster. Tian Buhui's alliance didn't have any king-level martial artists to begin with. Now that they were being attacked by the brothers, they were in a complete mess. Then, the group of more than 100 people rushed over like a mountain. They collided fiercely. A gap had been opened. More than 100 people rushed into the enemy group like a flood, and they split up effortlessly and started to fight on their own. In just a few breaths, the entire battlefield had turned into a hell of human corpses. Heads flew everywhere, and severed limbs flew everywhere. Blood splattered everywhere, and everyone went crazy. Their eyes were bloodshot, and they were slashing and slashing like mad demons. In this kind of battle environment, Mo Tianji's arrangement instantly played a decisive role. Every group of 2 people attacked at the same time, one defending and one attacking. The defense was watertight, and the offense was impenetrable. The cooperation between the teams was even more amazing. Every time a team was in danger, with a whistle, the enemy would realize that the enemy in front of them had changed, and it was replaced by a few other people. GMO, Huyan Albua, Luo Kadi, Ao Lai Yun, Xie Dan Qiong, Xie Dan Feng, Tan Tan Rui Butong, and the others coordinated and made arrangements. If there was danger and their own people were in danger, they would rush there. This was the so-called battlefield firefighting team that Mei Tianji had arranged. When he made the arrangements, everyone felt that it might not be useful. Thousands of people were fighting. What's the use of arranging 7 or 8 people to fight the fire? But at this moment, in this extremely chaotic moment, they realized that the power of this battlefield firefighting team was simply shocking. Many of their comrades who were about to be killed by the enemy were saved by them. Many enemies who had the upper hand were defeated for no reason. Chu Yang turned into a huge sword light that was a crazy troublemaker. He went back and forth in the enemy's camp, from east to west, and from south to north. He did his best to make the enemy's already messy camp even more messy. There was no way for him to launch a powerful attack. King of Hell Chu! A loud roar entered Chu Yang's ears. Chu Yang raised his hand and looked at her with his red eyes, only to see a Hei-Mo soldier clad in black running towards him. Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat. With a sweep of his sword, he cleared out a space and went up to meet him. This black devil soldier rushed over with grief and indignation. He roared as his thin sword mercilessly slashed at the enemy in front of him. He rushed all the way to Chu Yang. With a clang, the 2 swords clashed. The black devil soldier's sword broke, and in the next moment, Chu Yang's sword pierced into his chest. It was so smooth that Chu Yang could not believe it. This person had already killed 3 or 4 king-level masters on his way here. How could he be so weak? This person's momentum did not stop. His entire body hung on Chu Yang's sword as he slid over. The tip of the sword came out from his back. His eyes revealed a quiet smile. When he was close to Chu Yang, he said in an extremely low voice, "King of Hell Chu, tell Dong Wushang that if he dares to bully my junior martial sister, I won't forgive him even if I become a ghost." Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat as he looked over. That person's eyes revealed a pleased and satisfied smile as he said, "This is a necessary price." "Yes." After that, his eyes gradually dimmed. Suddenly, he struggled and said, "My name is Qin Ji. I've always liked you, but I've always... Chuan, I don't dare to... Chuan, I'm so happy today." Just as he finished speaking, he stopped breathing. The black mask slid off his face, revealing the face of a young man around 27 or 28 years old. At this moment, he was smiling peacefully. Chu Yang's heart shook violently. He suddenly raised his head and looked in the direction of the Black Devil camp. There was actually some anger in his heart. "Black Devil, what are you doing?" From these few words, he could hear a lot. Many of the king-level masters of the Black Devil camp knew about this battle. This person called himself Qin Ji. He was the disciple of the Black Devil. Qin Ji liked Immortal, but did not dare to say it. Today, he was here to send her off. But after he said these words, he was very happy in his heart. Why was he happy? "Tell Dong Wushang that if he dares to bully my junior martial sister, I will not forgive him even if I become a ghost." The despair of his love, the hopelessness of his love, the pain of his love. That's why he is so quiet today. because everything had been resolved. And there was a price to pay. No wonder everything seemed to go so smoothly from the start of today's battle. Chu Yang was still wondering how the Black Devil would face today. Only now did he know that this Black Devil was actually so intense. Chapter 696. Although Chu Yang did not have a good impression of the Black Devils, he still felt sour in his heart. Was it cruel? Was it cruel? Because the Black Devils had no other choice. This was because the battle between the martial kings and the martial emperors was separate. The martial kings would go first. Therefore, if the Black Devils made any moves, the remaining martial emperors would immediately be annihilated. Chu Yang concluded that the Black Devils would betray him during the battle between the martial emperors. Therefore, these martial kings had to be sacrificed. If these people betrayed him, the Black Devils would definitely be annihilated. If these people died, those people would have a chance to make a name for themselves. They would have a slight chance of survival. And all of this was a painful choice that the Black Devils made for his daughter. With a long sigh, Chu Yang pulled out his long sword. Qin Ji's body fell softly. Chu Yang thought to himself, I will pass on your words to Wu Shang. Then he roared as if he was venting the frustration in his heart. He turned around and charged madly into the crowd. Everyone was shouting about the fierce battle, so who would pay attention to such an insignificant scene in the millstone of flesh and blood? When the two teams came into contact, they saw that both sides were advancing. They were advancing madly. However, the people on Chu Yang's side passed through, leaving behind a ground full of broken corpses. They occupied the other side's camp. As the other side charged forward, they became a pile of minced meat. By the time the two sides brushed past each other, they had already exchanged positions. The other side had more than 1,000 martial kings. Now, there were less than 500 left. On Chu Yang's side, there were still more than 800 people who were at full strength. Both sides were panting violently. Their eyes were bloodshot as they stared at each other. They were preparing for the battle that was about to begin. It was a battle of life and death. In the sky above the battlefield, blood mist filled the air. On the ground, blood meandered and gradually formed a river of blood. It curved and flowed into the distance. At first, it was still emitting hot air. Later, the hot air slowly dissipated and the river froze. Tian Buhui rushed over angrily. He rushed in front of the Black Devils. What's going on? Why are the people of the Black Devils so weak? We just came into contact and they are all gone? What does that mean? The Black Demon looked at the black-clothed corpse and the pieces of flesh on the ground. His face behind the mask seemed to be convulsing in pain. He gritted his teeth as he spoke in a deep voice. This old man has said this before. The assassins that I have trained must be in the dark. They must be able to display their greatest power. 2 king-level experts can even assassinate an emperor-level expert. But how did you arrange it? You actually exposed my assassin in front of the enemy, and then fought him head-on. You ruined all of my efforts, and now you actually ask me why my combat strength is so weak? He took a step forward and glared at Tian Buhui. Did you see that they are all dead? Could it be that the corpse is fake? Did you see them running away at the last moment? Is there? He glared at Tian Buhui angrily as he stepped closer to him. Now, you're actually asking me what I mean by this. Let me ask you, what are your intentions? When he said this, everyone felt that Tian Buhui was too much. The Black Devils were very strong, but they were only good at assassinating in the dark. The people of the Black Devils had never fought with their enemies head-on. Tian Buhui was using such a reason to criticize the Black Devils. Furthermore, it was under the premise that the Black Devils were all dead. He was being too demanding. The two of them were on the verge of breaking out into a fight. At this moment, there was a loud roar. Everyone's attention was attracted to it. Chu Yang shouted, "Brothers! Throw them all into the lake of despair." All 800 people shouted together, "Throw them all into the lake of despair." Chu Yang raised his sword. His eyes flashed with coldness and ruthlessness as he charged forward. Behind him, the group of people charged forward like a tide. Now, there were no more Black Devil assassins in the group. This kind of result made Chu Yang feel stuffy in his heart. He also felt a burst of anger and sorrow. Therefore, he had to give it his all and kill. Beside him, Xie Danqiong's white robe flashed. The two of them charged forward side by side. On the other side, there was also a loud roar. They raised their swords and sabers. Their faces were twisted as they charged forward. Both sides only had eyes for their enemies. There was nothing else. Occasionally, they would trip over something. No matter whose corpse it was, they would kick it far away. Don't blame me. Maybe in the next moment, I'll be like you. Lying on the ground with a broken body, I'll be kicked away. Chu Yang let out a clear roar. His sword roared as it flew up. He was about to kill. However, just as he was about to make his move, he realized that a bright flower had already bloomed in front of him. That flower was like a fairy. It flashed in the air. It flashed to the left, then to the right. In a flash, it disappeared again. However, that flower was so beautiful that no one could bear to touch it. They couldn't bear to look at it. They couldn't even bear to think about it. The beauty of this flower had reached the pinnacle of this world. But what this incomparably beautiful flower brought was death. Because every time it flashed, every time it appeared, it was accompanied by a life. It was taken away while intoxicated by this flower. Every face that had been taken away by the flower still had traces of admiration and intoxication on them. It was as if they were willing to die under such a beautiful scene. It was intoxicating. Even in such a cruel battle, the appreciation of extreme beauty couldn't be erased. However, when beauty reached the pinnacle, it was darkness and destruction. After this flower flashed, blood would definitely flow. This was the flower of death. Viburnum flower. When the viburnum flower appeared, all other flowers would die. The power of the viburnum flower was truly displayed at this moment. This was a kind of cruel beauty. This was elegant cruelty. This was the ultimate kill of a gentleman. This kind of extreme beauty brought about extreme cruelty. Even the big clans and law enforcement officers were moved by it. Xie Danqiong finally unleashed the true power of the viburnum flower. Even Chu Yang was seeing such a massacre for the first time in his life. However, Xie Danqiong's face was calm and indifferent. With indifference to life, the viburnum flower continued to attack. It flew back and attacked again. Chu Yang thought in his heart, if Xie Danqiong can also smile as brightly and gently as the jade jasper flower when she makes her move, then perhaps that would be the ultimate. Although he thought so, his hands didn't stop at all. With a swing of his sword, Chu Yang attacked first. A white sword light danced in the air. Chu Yang flew through the air and landed at the densest part of the crowd. With a wave of screams, his sword swept across. Puff puff. 3 people were cut into 2 at the waist. 7 big men pounced on him from 3 directions. Chu Yang rushed forward. With 2 puffs, the tip of his sword cut through 2 big men's backs. Then, it disappeared with a whoosh. With a sliding step, he moved to the right side as if he was dancing alone on the ice and snow. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 3 heads flew into the air. 3 swords were broken in an instant and floated in the air as if they were weightless. The corpse had yet to fall to the ground, the broken sword had yet to touch the dust, and the buoyancy had yet to be eliminated. Chu Yang spun the soles of his feet, and the upper of his shoes rolled up a puff of sparkling and translucent ice and snow on the ground. His whole body had already turned around and rushed back. The 2 enemies behind him were now in front of him. With 2 claps, the 2 swords of the opponents collided with Chu Yang's sword. Wherever the sharpness of the divine sword passed, the 2 swords were separated like tofu. Chu Yang's sword extended and retracted. Then, with a whoosh, he rushed out from the gap between the 2 men. The 2 men seemed to be stunned for a moment. They suddenly turned around and wanted to chase. However, when they moved, the upper half of their bodies flew out from the waist. The 2 legs of the lower half of their bodies were still running on the snow. The 2 parts of the corpses that had just flown out met 3 swords at the same time. And they were chopped into pieces with a kacha sound. The people on Chu Yang's side thought that Chu Yang hadn't killed the 2 men. So they had come to besiege him. But they had chopped the corpses. And Chu Yang had already flown into another encirclement with a biting, cold, murderous aura. There were 3 king-level experts on his side in this encirclement. They were besieged by 7 or 8 people from the opposite side. They were in imminent danger. One of the king-level experts had already roared when Chu Yang arrived. His body was slashed several times. Blood splashed everywhere. Then, the swords and sabers came down together. He didn't even have time to scream as his flesh and blood flew out. Chu Yang roared and rushed forward with his sword in hand. Halfway through, his sword turned into a thick silver river of sword light. Rumbling sounds could be heard as it rushed forward. The experts on the enemy's side turned into a pile of blood. On the other side, Luo Kedi was fighting with 4 king-level experts at the same time. He roared wildly. Then, a sword silently shot out from a gap and stabbed towards Luo Kedi's waist. Luo Kedi wasn't aware of this. Chu Yang had seen it. But he was surrounded by enemies. So, he didn't have enough time to rescue him. So, he suddenly roared and kicked out his leg. It was like a thunderbolt as it ferociously kicked the neck of a king-level expert. A kacha sound was heard. This king-level expert of the Tian clan didn't even have time to groan. His head was kicked out of his neck. Blood violently spurted out. His head spun like a meteor as it flew out like a lightning bolt. That king-level expert had launched a sneak attack on Luo Kedi. He was secretly happy that he had succeeded. But he suddenly felt something heavy on his wrist. He found that his sword had inexplicably pierced a person's head. He took a closer look and realized that it was his subordinate. He roared in grief and indignation. He then loudly asked, "Who is it?" However, Chu Yang had already cut off 3 heads with his sword. His entire body was bathed in blood as he stood in front of him. The 2 of them didn't speak. Instead, they fiercely slashed their swords. Bang! That king-level expert's sword broke. Chu Yang flew high up in the air and ferociously kicked him in the chest. That king-level expert was sent flying upside down like a shrimp. The 7 king-level experts of Chu Yang's side attacked him at the same time. They intercepted him along the way. Their swords and sabers ruthlessly fell on him. He had turned into a skeleton by the time he fell to the ground. Chapter 697. GMO and Huyan Aobo combined their swords and attacked back and forth in the battle formation. One of them was tall while the other was short. One attacked while the other defended. Their coordination was flawless. On the other side, Tan Tan and Xie Danfeng were much more valiant. Both of them were main attackers. Both of them were equally crazy and didn't care about their own safety. Then, they hurriedly patched up the holes in the opponent's attack. Tan Tan was on the left side of Xie Danfeng. Rui Badong was on the right side of Xie Danfeng. That was because Xie Danfeng wasn't a king-level expert even though she was participating in the battle. She was only a high-level revered martial artist. Tan Tan alone wouldn't be able to protect her in such a battle where all the king-level experts were present. Therefore, Rui Budong's main responsibility in this battle was to protect Xie Danfeng. This was Chu Yang's order. Such an order was selfish and cruel for the other king-level experts who were participating in the battle. However, Chu Yang had no other choice. Ao Xie Yun's handsome face was already full of bloodstains. It was the same color as the red scarf on his head. There were 7 or 8 wounds on his body. However, he didn't retreat even half a step. He bravely moved forward and killed his way forward. "Oh!" Luo Kedi roared loudly. His body had been cut by a saber. However, this had stimulated his ferocious nature even more. The effect of his self-destructive training in the northern wilderness had finally manifested at this moment. He roared furiously and crazily rushed forward to kill. He didn't see Chu Yang even when he appeared beside him. The entire battlefield had been reduced from more than 2,000 people fighting together. Then, it had been reduced to more than 1,000 people fighting together. In the end, only less than 700 people were left fighting. The casualty rate of Chu Yang's side in this second battle was far higher than that of the first. That was because the other side already knew that they would lose and die this time. Therefore, everyone was fighting with their lives on the line. However, Chu Yang's side had a good start. Then, They had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. So, it was inevitable that they were somewhat relaxed. This was human nature. However, it was precisely this human nature that had caused the death of more than 100 experts who should not have died in the first place. The second battle was even faster than the first battle. It didn't take long for it to end. Slowly, the battle circle became smaller and smaller and gradually divided into three. There were less than 100 enemy experts left. They were trapped in 3 encirclements. Each of them was besieged by over 100 king-level experts. Both sides' eyes were bloodshot and ferocious. At this point in the battle, the so-called life and death, the so-called fear, had long been thrown beyond the clouds. The only thought left in his mind was to kill the enemy. He would drag the other party along with him. Killing one was more than enough. Kill 2, earn 1. You're going to die anyway. One of the enemy's middle-grade king-level experts roared. Then he suddenly pounced over without dodging. His body was pierced by more than a dozen swords while he was in midair. But he shook his right hand, and the sword flew out of his hand. Then, it deeply penetrated the chest of a king-level expert. The long sword pierced through his chest, leaving a trail of blood behind it as it flew across the snowy ground. It flew for over 100 feet before landing on the snowy ground with a clang. The sword swayed in the air as fresh blood dripped down, bringing with it hot air. Chu Yang issued an order, and his brothers flew up at the same time. They each pounced into the 3 encirclements. A series of ding-ding-dang-dang-dang sounds resounded. Then, a series of blood-curdling screams were heard. Then the entire battlefield became silent. No one else was standing in the entire battlefield apart from Chu Yang's people who had red cloth tied around their heads. There was a moment of silence. Then, someone suddenly bent down and vomited blood. This person had suffered internal injuries a moment ago and had forcibly endured it. However, he had finally relaxed at this moment and had vomited blood. Vomiting blood like this would have been equivalent to courting death if it had been a battle. The sound of vomiting resounded. Then, someone let out a long sigh and sat down on the ground. It didn't matter if it was a broken saber, a broken sword, or even a corpse on the ground. They were exhausted. The battle a moment ago was even more terrifying than a nightmare. Chu Yang looked around and sucked in a breath of cold air in his heart. He looked at the entire battlefield. More than 1,500 people had died here. But he couldn't find a single complete corpse. Only pieces of flesh and blood were left on the ground. Every 1,000 people had participated in the battle. Only 100 people had participated in the battle on his own side. There were less than 400 people left alive. As for those who were physically disabled, and those who had broken arms or legs, there were countless of them. And these were the lucky ones. Even the most brilliant coroner wouldn't be able to piece together more than 1,500 corpses under such circumstances. In fact, he wouldn't be able to piece together even 300 complete corpses under such circumstances. Everyone was a king-level expert, and each of them had risked their lives. Their flesh and blood would scatter as long as they made a mistake. And that short period of time when they were about to die was the time when they would suffer the most damage. Everyone would rather stab a dead body with a knife than let the enemy have the opportunity to lay on the ground and launch a sneak attack. And they wanted to die a complete death under such a mentality? It was no different from a dream. Roll call. Count off. Chu Yang stood in a depressed manner. Warm blood was still dripping from his hair. After counting, there were only 314 king-level experts on Chu Yang's side who were still alive, including Chu Yang and his brothers. Out of 100 people who had participated in the battle, 332 had died. The bloody fog on the battlefield hadn't dispersed yet. Everyone was facing this tragic scene and remained silent. Men, bring the injured and unconscious back to recuperate. The rest of you, clean up the battlefield. Throw the corpses into the lake of despair. The blood vessels in Chu Yang's eyes slowly faded away. Looking at the corpses all over the ground, he gritted his teeth. His cheeks clearly bulged. He took a deep breath of the bloody air, raised his head, and let out a long, long sigh. Finally, he turned his head and shouted coldly. He gave a cruel order. Such a decision would undoubtedly be cold-blooded and cruel if it was in any other place. But here, at the Lake of Despair, regardless of whether it was the corpses thrown into the Lake of Despair or the people who cleaned up the battlefield, it was a kind of honor, a kind of respect for the enemy. Only the victors could have the honor of cleaning up the battlefield. Only the corpses of heroes could be thrown into the Lake of Despair to accompany the heroic spirits of the past generations, under the witness of two supreme martial artists. This was the most honorable place in the three heavens, regardless of life or death. Chu Yang knew that the three heavens people thought this way, but when he said this, his heart was still in turmoil. He felt pity for them. This was because there were many people who had chatted with him just a day ago, or even just a moment ago. When talking about this battle, he still remembered that bearded martial king of the Xie clan said straightforwardly, "My life was originally picked up. If I could die in the Lake of Despair, my life wouldn't have been in vain. Besides, my wife and daughter have been killed by the Ao clan. I have nothing to worry about. The sooner I die, the sooner I can be reunited." Now, this martial king was quietly lying not far away, with his body incomplete. How could Chu Yang not hear the grief and indignation in his heart? The Ao clan master had compensated the few Ao clan masters for their sins. The few Ao clan masters and the mastermind behind them had all died. But his wife and daughter couldn't come back to life. In the end, he didn't take revenge with his own hands. But he couldn't take revenge anymore. Perhaps he only had one wish left, to be reunited. There was another person, the martial king of the Ao clan. Back then, when he was standing with Ao Shiyun, that skinny martial king had said to him and Ao Shiyun, "If you die in battle, if you can win and survive, when you go back, tell my son not to practice martial arts for the rest of his life. Please give him a few acres of land and let him find a wife to farm." Now, that person was also lying there. Only his head was left. Even his body couldn't be found. Chu Yang didn't know why he would feel this way. Why did he tell his son not to practice martial arts for the rest of his life? But he knew that this person, as a father, must have his reasons for saying this. Vengeance in the martial world, the intertwining of gratitude and grudges, added to the beauty of blood. But how much familial love was lost and how much common life was missed? "I will help you pass on these words," Chu Yang said silently. Then he raised his head and quietly closed his eyes. "Brothers, rest in peace. If there is a next life, we will be friends again and fight again." Under Mo Tianji's command, the battlefield rescue team rushed out quickly. But they met with resistance. Other than those who had already fainted, those who had broken arms and legs refused to go back to rest. "We want to clean up the battlefield. We want to stay. We want to personally send our brothers and our enemies into the Lake of Despair. We hope that they can live and work peacefully in the Lake of Despair. There are no grudges in the Lake of Despair." Faced with these people's stubbornness, the battlefield rescue team could only choose to move the unconscious people away and return silently. Everyone seemed to be carrying out a solemn ceremony. They gathered the corpses on the ground, regardless of whether they were enemies or allies. Then, they carried the corpses in pairs and walked towards the Lake of Despair. Their expressions were so solemn, so respectful and so sorrowful. Just a moment ago, they were still fighting with their lives on the line, slashing viciously at their enemies. In the blink of an eye, they had become like this. It was as if they were mourning for their loved ones. They were heartbroken, respectful, and nostalgic. Such a scene, such a change in mood, seemed abrupt. It didn't seem right. But everyone present, including the great clans and those who held the law, felt that this was how a real man should behave. This was how the Lake of Despair should be. Therefore, none of them made a sound. They only watched quietly and respectfully. More than 300 people were slowly cleaning up the battlefield. They didn't even let go of a drop of blood. They respectfully held it up and sent it into the Lake of Despair. The speed of cleaning was extremely slow, but everyone seemed to be more patient and tolerant at this moment. As the corpses of the deceased were thrown into the Lake of Despair, ripples slowly appeared on the surface of the lake. Circle after circle of ripples gradually spread out, merging into one piece after another. It was as if the dead were bidding farewell to the living. The sky was gloomy. Slowly, the cold wind whistled. It actually started to snow. Tomorrow would be the final battle of the martial emperors. Another batch of corpses of heroes would be added to the Lake of Despair, which hadn't changed since ancient times. Gu Duxing stood quietly in front of his tent. As he watched the scene, he thought about the final battle that should belong to him tomorrow. Suddenly, his heart trembled with excitement. He raised his eyebrows and sword energy surged to his chest. With a clang, the black dragon sword actually jumped out of its scabbard. It shone with a cold light and lay across the sky. All the experts present, including the great clans and those who held the law, were caught off guard. The long swords at their waists let out a crisp sword sound at the same time. It was as if they were about to struggle out. They worshipped the king. The sword emperor appeared, and all swords submitted to him. Instantly, a wave of astonished gazes looked over from all directions. Chapter 698. That night, Gu Duxing stood alone in front of his tent. He didn't move at all for the entire night. Heavy snow fell from the sky. Gu Duxing quickly became a snowman. However, he seemed to have entered a strange state. He didn't care about anything around him. Chu Yang sat quietly about 70 to 80 feet in front of him. He didn't say anything and didn't move. Soon he also became a snowman. Behind him in the tent, under the flickering candlelight, Mo Tianji held a book in one hand and read it quietly. GMO, Luo Kadi, Dong Wushang, Rui Butong, Tan Tan, Xie Dan Qiong, Ao Xie Yun, and the rest sat quietly in different parts of the tent. Their eyes seemed to be open, and they were all resting. However, an invisible aura spread out from the tent and faintly formed a large circle with Chu Yang outside. It shrouded Gu Duxing, who was immersed in his epiphany, and protected him inside. Gu Duxing's state was very rare. It was a crucial stage on the path of martial arts. He couldn't be disturbed by anyone. Therefore, all the brothers acted as his protectors without prior agreement. They didn't sleep for the entire night. They weren't the only ones who didn't sleep for the entire night. It was as if the members of the dominant clans had discovered a treasure. They were also observing Gu Duxing's side from all directions. Even the enforcers were waiting quietly. Tianbu Hui didn't do anything. He was warned by the enforcers. Before the battle between martial emperors begins, no one is allowed to act rashly. This warning was obviously biased towards Gu Duxing. Tianbu Hui was so angry that his stomach almost exploded. The enemy was breaking through right in front of him, but he couldn't disturb him. What kind of logic was this? Waiting for him to break through so that he could kill us? And the enforcers were so unfair. However, Tianbu Hui had misunderstood. The enforcers weren't just biased. A sword sovereign. He was rare even in the upper three heavens. He was a legendary existence. There were many martial monarchs and martial saints in the dominant clans. However, how many of them were called sword sovereigns? One had to know that each of these large clans had tens of thousands of years of heritage. Didn't they know how powerful sword sovereigns and sword sovereigns were? How could they not nurture them? However, after 10,000 years, how many had they nurtured? Not to mention that it was actually a sword emperor who hadn't even reached the age of 20. Moreover, it was obviously not primary stage 1. The shock this brought to everyone was simply unparalleled. No matter who it was, being able to witness the process of a sword emperor's breakthrough was extremely beneficial. Yi Xiu praised in a low voice, "This little guy looks even more abnormal than my elder brother." My elder brother was already 22 years old when he broke through to the first stage of Sword Sovereign. This guy is obviously only 10 years old and definitely not 20 years old. And from the looks of it, he's about to break through to the second or third stage. What a monster! Although his voice was still feminine, because he was whispering in a low voice, it was not coquettish. "Be quiet." The Yi clan's expert bodyguard beside him hastily reminded him. "I know." Yi Xiu rolled his eyes and twisted his waist. The guard immediately rolled his eyes and slapped his own mouth in regret. "Look at my mouth. I made him whine again." The people from the other aristocratic families didn't say a word. They just watched quietly, afraid that they might miss something. Even the cultivators didn't look away. Looking at the two people in the snow below, one sitting and one standing, and feeling the vigilant aura, everyone felt touched. If I break through to the next stage, will there be people protecting me like this? Chen Fei Chen's gaze flickered slightly. He looked at Chu Yang and Gu Duxing, who were already covered in snow, and said slowly, "In my life, I hate brothers like this the most. For people like this, it's good to have one friend. The others will naturally acknowledge you. But if you want to kill them for revenge, you must kill them all. If you let any one of them escape, there will be endless trouble in the future. If you kill one of these people, the others will give up all their goals in life. They will spend their lives with revenge as their ultimate goal. This is the scariest," Chen Feichen said indifferently. At the side, a bodyguard sighed and said, "The scariest thing isn't the person, but friendship." "Nonsense," Chen Feichen said disdainfully. "This is a bunch of one-track-minded idiots." He paused and tilted his head strangely, saying, "Why do I have a premonition that in the future, I will definitely become enemies with these people?" The two bodyguards were stunned. The snow continued to fall, getting heavier and heavier. It was already late at night. Chu Yang and Gu Duxing had already completely turned into two snowmen. Even their hair and clothes were not exposed. Chu Yang suddenly felt something. He raised his head slightly. The snow fell for a while. He looked at Gu Duxing and closed his eyes again. Just now, he suddenly felt that the place where Gu Duxing was originally standing had suddenly lost Gu Duxing's aura. It was as if Gu Duxing had suddenly disappeared from this world. But at a glance, Gu Duxing was clearly still standing there quietly. When he closed his eyes, he felt that there was still an emptiness there. Unity of heaven and man. The white-bearded cultivator's face was solemn. He said seriously in a low voice, as if he was afraid of waking up Gu Duxing, who was in this state. But in reality, he was almost 3,000 feet away from Gu Duxing. At such a distance, if it was an ordinary person, even if it was not snowing, they would not be able to see anything. After a while, a lonely and desolate aura suddenly spread between heaven and earth. But in this lonely aura, it seemed to be filled with traces of concern, traces of reluctance. It was as if a person who was at the peak of the world was looking at the world in endless loneliness with pity and reluctance. Because there, he was concerned about it. What is going on? This is obviously contradictory. Ling Han Shue's beautiful eyes revealed a puzzled look. Since it is the lonely swordsman, there is Gu Duxing. How can he still enter such a lonely state? This was the doubt that everyone had. But although they did not understand, everyone already understood. Everyone was experienced and knowledgeable. How could they not feel that even if there was concern, the lonely swordsman was still the lonely swordsman? So this Gu Duxing sword was still the lonely sword emperor. This was also the sword intent of this sword emperor. Everyone closed their eyes and tried to understand the heavenly Tao of this lonely sword emperor. Even if they could not understand it, they could understand some of the aura and comprehend it. Loneliness filled the air and spread far and wide. When it filled the entire world, it suddenly retracted and disappeared without a trace. "Did you break through?" The white-bearded wielder opened his eyes and sighed regretfully. "I didn't get anything." "No. It was not a breakthrough. It was still a breakthrough." Then he was shocked by what he saw. Another long silence. Gu Duxing once again fell into a state of emptiness. It was already 4 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly, a mysterious feeling spread out endlessly. And this time, every expert who tried to understand this state hurriedly retracted their divine senses. Their hearts were filled with lingering fear and shock at the same time. Because when they came into contact with this state, they quickly felt that they had forgotten everything. Yes, forgotten. It was as if in such a state, everything in their past had quickly disappeared from their memories. And Gu Duxing, who was standing there motionlessly, seemed to be floating at this moment. He had forgotten everything and forgotten everything. He had forgotten this heaven, forgotten this earth, forgotten this world. A sword intent seemed to have been forgotten by the world. It was wandering aimlessly in the sky. Wherever it floated, sword energy would fill the sky. How is this possible? The white-bearded cultivator stood up in shock. How can a sword emperor comprehend two completely different sword intents at the same time? Not only him, the others also opened their eyes in shock. Many people stood up. They did not know that this was the sword intent that Gu Duxing had comprehended after the battle with Tu Qianhao. Unruffled emotions. Unruffled emotions, great technique. Now Gu Duxing was in a state that even he could not grasp. But the spiritual power that he had displayed could be regarded as the great technique of unruffled emotions that Tu Qianhao had spent his entire life researching in his previous life. If he could release this kind of concept at will when he was conscious, then he would have reached the point where he would have some achievements. Suddenly, Gu Duxing's body trembled slightly. In the snow-covered land, a wisp of melancholy, loneliness, endless desolation, and ethereal silence gently came out. A sword across the sky, towards the peak. Life is saved. Turning around, it is empty. Where is the world? A soulmate is rewarded. When I want to look back, I have already forgotten. The white-bearded cultivator's eyes shone brightly. His hands trembled slightly. His white beard fluttered and trembled as he listened to this poem. Perhaps this was a sword technique. He seemed to have felt Gu Duxing's state of mind. As a saint-level expert, he was the only one who was qualified to interpret these 4 lines of Gu Duxing's sword technique. But after he interpreted them, this saint-level expert felt even more depressed. A sword across the sky towards the peak. As a sword emperor, there was nothing else other than the sword. A sword emperor was originally so lonely. This sentence sounded very heroic, but in fact, it was the state of mind of a lonely swordsman. But the next sentence clearly went from the realm of loneliness to the realm of being free and easy like flowing clouds and flowing water, yet at the same time, it was also a realm of frustration. No matter how hard one works, victory or defeat will become nothing in the blink of an eye. This was contradictory to the previous sentence. Since everything became nothing, then what was the point of working hard? So, it became an exploration of life, and a passive one at that. Where is the world's soulmate? This sentence clearly changed. His state of mind had changed 7 to 8 times in these 3 sentences. How could he cultivate to be a sword emperor with such a complicated state of mind? This sentence was obviously filled with disappointment, loneliness, and desolation, but in fact, if one listened carefully, one could tell that this sentence was indeed somewhat proud. And where is the world's soulmate? It was not that there was no soulmate. When I want to look back, I have already forgotten. This sentence had completely entered the state of forgetfulness. But it was also, when I want to look back. Then why do I have to look back? So, although I have forgotten, I am still me. Concern is still concern. This was a circle from the beginning. After 1 round, it returned to the beginning. But this was already different from the beginning. It had already transcended. The white-bearded cultivator was depressed. He understood it completely, but he could not cultivate at all. Chapter 699. No wonder people say that the realm of a sword sovereign will never be repeated. Every sword intent would only belong to a single person. This person's death will be the end. Even after billions of years, there will never be a repeat. The white-bearded enforcer mumbled, I see. It's really so. It seems like today's battle will be a solo performance by this sword sovereign. No wonder people say that a sword sovereign needs a sacrifice to achieve a breakthrough. And this sacrifice must be a great loss of life. The next moment, Gu Duxing let out a clear roar and shook violently from the pile of snow on his left. The pile of snow on his left suddenly exploded and half of his body was exposed. A solitary sword aura was emitted. They rushed up into the boundless snowy sky. It was sharp and powerful. It was brilliant and unparalleled. 3rd-grade sword sovereign. The white-bearded enforcer was shocked. But why is only half of his body exposed? Could it be? Then, there was another explosion. The pile of snow on Gu Duxing's right suddenly exploded and his entire body was exposed. A sword will of the emotionless sword also exploded from the right side of his body. The black dragon sword issued a loud and clear sword cry, and suddenly unsheathed itself from the scabbard. It carried a wisp of arrogant disdain, and flew straight up into the sky. It swallowed and spat out sword light in midair, and looked down on the world with disdain. Gu Duxing's entire body seemed to have been separated into two halves. One was lonely and the other was emotionless. These two different sword wills were reflected on his body and also separated his body into two halves. However, it was in the same body as him. Unified. Perfect embodiment. He is indeed a sword sovereign with two attributes. The white-bearded enforcer took in a breath of cold air. His eyes suddenly emitted a burning glow. Gu Duxing's artistic conception had enveloped Chu Yang from the start till the end. Or rather, Chu Yang had always been at the core of Gu Duxing's artistic conception. When Gu Duxing felt the depths of the Sword of Solitude, Chu Yang also felt the loneliness that came from the depths of love. Gu Duxing's loneliness was not the loneliness of being at the top of the world. It was the loneliness of not having anything else other than his sword. The loneliness of not having anything else other than his emotions. Gu Duxing's state of mind was just that stubborn. At the same time of this breakthrough, he opened up his heart completely to his friends. Only by reaching the pinnacle of the sword could one achieve the pinnacle of the sword. Only by being extremely emotional could one be loyal to their feelings. You can forget your feelings. Forgetting one's feelings wasn't about forgetting. Instead, it was about integrating one's feelings into this world. Coexisting with heaven and earth. For eternity. This love had a life of its own. Just like Gu Duxing's sword, it now had a life of its own. Gu Duxing had already broken through to the third stage of Sword Emperor. However, Chu Yang was still sitting there. He was still immersed in the artistic conception of Gu Duxing. In such a place of sword intent, he actually couldn't help but think of Mo Qingwu. Then, another scene seemed to appear in his heart. In that instant, his heart ached. His heart was like the sun setting in the mountains, the light fog gradually thickening. It was almost at this moment that Chu Yang lost himself. Purple bamboo forest. Her red clothes were like blood, and the purple bamboo fluttered in the wind. She was peerless in her generation, and her gaze was filled with sorrow. If I dance for you, I won't suffer for the rest of my life. If you watch my dance, I won't be alone in life or death. His red clothes fluttered, dancing for you in this life. Even if he was mercilessly abandoned, he would still dance for you. Even if it was bitter, he wouldn't be bitter. Because he didn't dance lightly, this dance was for a lifetime. Wrapped in the snow, Chu Yang sighed softly, feeling extremely disappointed. In this state of complete solitude, he completely understood Gu Duxing's sword intent. However, because of this sword intent, he thought of something else. Gu Duxing's sword intent, Gu Duxing's feelings, Chu Yang already completely understood. But he only understood, he wouldn't cultivate it. Moreover, after understanding it, he abandoned himself outside of Gu Duxing's sword intent. Because this was Gu Duxing's sword intent, but Chu Yang had Chu Yang's sword intent. Therefore, it was one thing for Chu Yang to understand it, and another for him to comprehend his own sword intent. Just like how Gu Duxing couldn't forget Gu Miaoling, but Chu Yang's heart was Mo Qingwu. Gu Miaoling and Mo Qingwu were not the same person. It was the same for his sword intent. However, because Gu Duxing comprehended his sword of solitude, his sword of oblivion, because of his feelings, this feeling moved Chu Yang's heart. Therefore he sighed. There was never a moment when he missed Mo Qingwu so urgently and so bitterly. Whether it was the Mo Qingwu of the previous life or the Mo Qingwu of this life. Because you danced for me in the previous life, I'm willing to suffer for you in this life. Qingwu, I'm waiting for you. Waiting for you to grow up. White snow drifted down, and Gu Duxing's voice came from outside the snow pile. Do you understand? Chu Yang sighed. What about you? Do you understand? Gu Duxing smiled. Although Chu Yang was trapped in the snow and couldn't see Gu Duxing smile, he could imagine that Gu Duxing's smile must be very blissful. I understand. This time, I've comprehended third stage sword sovereign. This is a very insignificant matter. Gu Duxing smiled and said, most importantly, I understand the direction of my life. I practice the sword, be it solitude or oblivion, not to kill people. It's to protect. Protect Sister Xiaomiao, protect my brothers. Protect all the people I care about. Gu Duxing said, since it's to protect, then when you protect, you must oblivion. Because to protect is to protect. Chu Yang smiled gently. My sword is different from yours, but we both do it to protect. Chu Yang remembered that when he had just been reborn, he once said to his master, Meng Chaoran, practicing the sword is to kill people. But now, Gu Duxing said, practicing the sword is not to kill people. It seemed very contradictory, but now Chu Yang only knew that what he said at that time was wrong. Because at that time, he was still immersed in the martial arts realm of his previous life. Gu Duxing's current realm had completely surpassed his previous realm, including his state of mind. Therefore, Gu Duxing had already formed his own path of martial arts. Gu Duxing gave a carefree smile and said, in the end, it's all about one sentence. Martial arts is about protection. Chu Yang pondered for a long time, and finally he burst out from the snow pile with a bang. He laughed and said, that's right. Actually, this is the reason. The martial arts path is actually because this world is not safe. Ordinary people can't protect their own things, so I want to strengthen myself to protect the things I care about. This is a process. This process forms a pattern, and it becomes the martial arts path. This time, it was Gu Duxing's turn to be stunned. He frowned and said, what are you talking about? Chu Yang laughed and said, that's it, that's it. Chu Yang suddenly became cheerful. He felt that he had never been so cheerful before. He also didn't understand why he suddenly thought of this, why he suddenly thought it through and became cheerful. But from now on, his mood suddenly became better. Chu Yang stood up, laughed twice, and walked into the tent. Facing the crazy eyes of the brothers, he laughed twice and scolded, motherfucker. Everyone was stunned. Gu Duxing stood outside for a long time. He scratched his head and said inexplicably, what did Gu Duxing do to me just now? What is all this nonsense? He thought about it for a long time, but to no avail. He recalled everything he said, and it seemed that he didn't know how to make Chu Yang behave like this. Finally, the more he thought about it, the more incredulous it was. He finally gave up and muttered, with boss? I really can't speak like a normal person. I can't understand it with a normal person's thinking. He's a real weirdo. He shook his head and finally went into the tent. This night, Chu Yang and the rest were so excited that they didn't sleep. On the other hand, Tian Bu Hui was so depressed that he couldn't sleep. The most painful thing in life was to see the enemy that he was going to fight in the morning break through right in front of his eyes. Furthermore, this enemy was the one who had the most destructive power, and the one who could affect the outcome of the battle the most. Of course, this wasn't the saddest thing. The saddest thing was that he could only watch as his enemy broke through, but he couldn't do anything to stop him. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that if he tried to stop him now, he might not succeed. But if he didn't do anything, the enemy would definitely break through. Yet, at this moment, a law enforcement officer appeared and told him, if you dare to stop him, I'll kill you right now. I won't let you wait until the battle tomorrow. I'll kill you. How could Tian Bu Hui not be heartbroken by this? How could he not complain about the unfairness of the heavens? Thus, Tian Bu Hui's heart was frying. Finally, he gathered everyone. The battle between the martial emperors is at daybreak. But at this moment, Gu Duxing broke through. He's a sword sovereign. Tian Bu Hui's face darkened. Once he breaks through, it'll be even harder to stop him. Originally, the difference in strength between both parties was very small. If we allow him to unleash his full potential tomorrow, we'll have an 80% chance of losing. In the battle between the martial emperors, we've lost all our martial emperors. If the battle between the martial emperors happens, we'll lose all our martial emperors again. Then even if we win, what can we do? Tian Bu Hui smiled viciously. In this battle, the elites of the upper three heavens will all be buried. Perhaps, in the end, only one of us will be left, the martial saint from the Shi clan from the upper three heavens. Everyone was silent. Such a thing could really happen, because the final victor would have to kill all the losers. This was the rule of the battle at the Lake of Despair. The losers couldn't leave the mountain. If all the martial emperors and martial emperors died, only a few old martial emperors and an invited martial saint were left. Then even if they won, what could they do? What Lord Tian means is... The Zhao and Li clan masters asked at the same time. Kill Gu Duxing. Tian Buhui's eyes flashed. Our battle can't be like the battle between the martial emperors. We have to gather the strongest martial emperors and kill Gu Duxing, who just broke through to the sword sovereign level. Don't let him unleash his sword power. Everyone's faces darkened as they nodded their heads. A sword sovereign was invincible in the upper three heavens when he unleashed his sword power. When Gu Duxing was just a grade 1 sword sovereign, he could fight against a grade 1 martial emperor when he unleashed his sword power. Then, how powerful would a grade 3 sword sovereign be? It was obvious. Lord Black Devil, you're the most experienced when it comes to assassinations. What do you think about this? Tian Buhui straightened his body and asked seriously. This chapter started at 7:30 p.m. last night. 13 hours had passed. I'm really devastated. I should have just written about the battle. It's so good to write about the battle. I don't have to think about it. I just have to shout a few times and kill a few people, but I've spent 13 hours writing this. Although I've sent it to all of you, I'm still not satisfied. This fucking torment. I've only spent 20 minutes writing about Tian Buhui. This means that I've been tormented for 12 hours by the things I've written. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.